Welcome into this crossover edition of Hand Raised Guys, presented by Comer Heating and Air, Southern Air Conditioning and Heating, and the Josh Hendrickson Show, featuring the chair of economics at Ole Miss, one Dr. Josh Hendrickson. We're in the Clark Ford studios. Clark Ford is in Amory, Mississippi, 662-257-1900. Call that number. Ask for Corey Clark. Tell Corey what Ford product you're looking for. He'll send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours. You guys know the drill by now. He'll take great care of you. He wants to be your car guy. He wants to be your truck guy. 662-257-1900. Guest will join on the Campbell Clinic Hotline. I'll tell you about the Campbell Clinic a little bit later, but there's the number 662-426-1464. And again, we're brought to you by Comer Heating and Air, Southern Air Conditioning and Heating. Different names, same great products, people, and services. If you live in Oxford, Batesville, Tupelo, or the surrounding area, two things. One, you know it's about to get hot. Two, you want to make sure your air conditioner's ready to roll. So give them a call, 662-801-1777. If you live in Hernando, South Haven, Memphis, those areas, get in touch with our friends at Southern, 662-429-4429. I don't know the exact details on this, but I can tell you that sometime in the next few weeks, we're going to be giving away via our friends at Comer and Southern a complete heating and air system. I probably don't have to tell you how much that is. It's pretty expensive. I don't know exactly how we're going to do it. We're not going to tell you when it's coming. Just going to tell you it's going to happen on one of these Thursday night live shows, and it'll be to a certain caller, a number of callers. We'll figure it out. Not going to tell you when it's coming. Not tonight. I'll tell you it's not tonight. I don't have the details tonight, but at some point here in the next several weeks, on a Thursday night or a Wednesday night, whatever night we do one of these shows, we'll be giving away a brand new heating and air system from our friends at Comer and Southern. Got some NBA going on tonight. We can talk about that if you like. I have a feeling we're going to talk about other things. Milwaukee, Indiana. This is Game 6 in Indianapolis. The Pacers can put this thing away tonight. Milwaukee can force a Game 7. A little later tonight, it's the Knicks in Philadelphia. The Sixers trying to even that series at 3 games each. The Knicks can put it away with a win on the road in Philly. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing well.
I don't even know where to begin on things to talk about. Can't even imagine. You work on a college campus.
Yep.
At Ole Miss. You've been there for how long?
13 years.
13 years. Guess your thoughts when you found out that today was going to be a demonstration, for those who haven't followed along. First of all, God bless you, man. I mean, I'm seriously, I'm jealous if you've not noticed what's happening. I mean that sincerely. Kudos to you. There was a time in my life that I would have made fun of you. This is not that time. I go, hey, good for you. It's happened at Columbia, at UCLA, at University of Texas, yesterday at University of Alabama. Today it was at Ole Miss. The pro-Palestine support pro-Palestine protesters, I should say. I guess we're trying to solve the conflict in Oxford, Mississippi. Ole Miss has been trending on Twitter today, and frankly, I think it's been a pretty good look for the school.
Yeah, your biggest concern when something like this happens is that it's going to turn into sort of like what we've seen at places like Columbia and UCLA, where it's just complete chaos, people fighting.
Scoot your chair that way just a hair so people can see you a little better. There you go. Perfect.
And so, you just worry about you just worry about violence. You worry about destruction. You worry about, the groups just kind of getting physical with each other, things like that. And so, overall, I would say that, it probably went really well. Ole Miss was trending on Twitter this afternoon, and pretty much for good reasons. They were just like, people were kind of showing the video of students like singing the national anthem and things like that. And that's what you hope for, is that, whenever there's a planned protest, that there's going to be a counter protest, and you just hope that it's civilized. And I think that, they represented themselves well.
I thought Tate Reeves, the Mississippi governor, gets a lot of criticism, often deserved. If you're the governor, you're always going to get criticized. But I thought his statement this morning was right. I thought he nailed it on social media, which was, look, people have a right to gather and peacefully protest. Absolutely, 100%. First Amendment, no question. The deal is when it goes from protest to law breaking, it's no longer a protest. This was the maddening thing about the summer of 2020 to me. Well, two things, but the big one was quit calling them protest. When you're lighting things on fire and destroying cars and breaking glass and breaking into stores and looting stores, you're not protesting, you're rioting. There's a big difference. If you're marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge peacefully, trying to make a statement and an organized protest, that's a protest.
Well,
There's a big difference.
Well, I think that one of the things that gets lost is people mistake like freedom of speech for like I should have an audience, and like you're not entitled to an audience. Like freedom of speech allows you to say what you want to say and express yourself, but it doesn't entitle you to a particular audience. And so, you can go out there and, but you have to be, you just want these things to be civilized. You want people to express themselves. Like that's one of the things that makes the United States a great place, is that we all get to express ourselves freely, and you hope that people can do that in a peaceful way. And what we've seen at a lot of these college campuses is that it hasn't been peaceful. And I think that, and I think that's the thing that you worry about.
So let's go there, because this is where I think is the story. And there are some media outlets that are touching on this. Most are either skirting around it or completely avoiding it. And I'm going to be careful here. I'm going to protect the source. But I have it on pretty good authority that Ole Miss has known about this for a bit. The officials at Ole Miss, the administration. I'm sure that this is the same thing at Alabama and other places that I mean, you're prepared for this. And they had plans. Had a plan. They had a strategy of how to handle. And that what I said was a First Amendment abiding protest within the area that is set aside for protesting was absolutely going to be protected, which is the right thing to do. But they were more than prepared, if the line got crossed, to shut it down, and shut it down quickly. And then here's the interesting part. Like, I know for a fact tents weren't going to be allowed to be set up. They weren't allowing that stuff to get going. But what's interesting is I'm told that at Ole Miss, and I suspect this is not unique to Ole Miss, that at Ole Miss, the actual like Palestinian student group had no role in this. They told the university that they weren't involved in this. This wasn't what they were doing. And so the question is for you, and I'm curious your thoughts, and I know you've talked to some people at North Carolina where this probably is the most iconic visual so far, with the fraternity boys holding the flag up that they were the American flag. Who are the people, if they're not students on these campuses who are enraged or upset about this, what's going on in Gaza? If it's not them, who is it?
Yes, I have a good friend at UNC. I'm going to try to get him to call in tonight so maybe he can talk about it, because he was when those guys in the fraternity were out there holding up the flag, he was the only faculty member that was standing with them while they were doing it. And he was, people were trying to come across barricades. People were trying to throw barricades at them. And he was like, and he was preventing them from doing so. And when I talked to him, one of the things that he said is like, when I'm looking at these protesters, they're not students. Like, they don't look like students. They're older than students. They're not, like they're here, like they're deliberately looking for chaos. Like they're deliberately trying to provoke people. And I think that that's one thing that we have to recognize here, is that, you don't have a spontaneous protest where professionally made signs like show up, like, within a day or so of the protests getting set up. Like that just doesn't happen, right? So somebody is funding these things. Now there are lots of, now that doesn't necessarily mean anything nefarious. So like there are organizations that are, supportive of the Palestinian cause who get lots of money from Middle Eastern countries that just want to. They're like, hey, these people are on our side. Let's give them money. And so, but at the same time, you also have to think about, um, what's going on behind the scenes. Like you saw at Columbia, there was this woman, and she like describes herself as sort of like a professional, like advisor to protests or something like that, right? Like this is her job. And it's kind of like, well, how could that be like a full-time job, right? Like, I mean, this isn't France. Like we're not protesting every day in the streets. And so there are people that are funding this sort of thing. There are people who are behind it. And so we have to also be cognizant of that. We also have to, I mean, this is why I was like really proud of the students at Ole Miss, because you like you might want to show up and counter protest, and you might want to make your voice heard, or you might want to express your opinion also. But you can't fall for the tactics. Like they're trying to provoke you into doing something. They're trying to provoke a scene. They're trying
to lure you
right,
off sides, right? I mean, that's where they want. They want you to jump.
Yeah. And so like, and that's what we've really seen is like you've seen all these scenes from UCLA, from Columbia, from North Carolina, where you just have people, setting out to create these these violent interactions. And the reason that this happens is you see a very clear difference in how people treat these things, right? So if you look at how places like Columbia and UCLA did this, kind of like when the protests start, they just kind of like let it go, and they kind of just are like, okay, we're just gonna let them go out here and protest and do whatever. But they don't actually like they don't do a good job of actually articulating like what your rights are and what the rules are, right? So so what they need to do, and this is what a lot of places where this violence hasn't broken out. I think Florida was the very first one that I saw that did this, where they very clearly articulated the following things are your rights. We cannot stop you from doing these things. If you want to do those things, you can do those things. And then they said the following things are either against the law or against university policy. And if you are caught doing those things, then we will arrest you and suspend you. And they gave that to them like when they set up their protest. So they went out and like the I believe it was the university police went out and just handed out these pieces of paper to all the protesters and said, you need to read this because you need to know what your rights are and you need to know what the rules are, because if you violate the rules, like we're taking you out. And the places that have done things like that, those places have not had the conflict. Those places have not had the sort of out of control scenes that you see all over the news and all over social media. You don't have that, because now there are people who violate the rules. There are people who get removed from the protest. There are people who get arrested. But they've had these rules clearly articulated to them. And so the thing is that when you do that, and when you clearly articulate these things, and when you get out ahead of these things, that's the kind of thing that prevents this sort of madness from taking place, because people now recognize where the lines are. Because it's very hard. Like, I mean, it's very hard not to get caught up in emotions, right? Like if lots of people are ignorant of what the rules are. Lots of people are ignorant of what the law is. But ignorance of the law is not a defense when you show up in court. And so you have to know these things. And if you tell these people ahead of time, that helps the people who are there, just to support the cause, who are there for good reasons. It's those people. It helps them to not let their emotions get the best of them, because they've just been presented very clearly with what they are and are not allowed to do. And so they're going to think twice before they do things. Whereas if these things are not articulated, you have people just do crazy stuff, and because they get caught up in the emotion. I mean, I don't know if you saw this. There was I do not know this woman, but there was an economics professor at Emory who got arrested.
I did see this.
And
I wondered if she was one of your friends, maybe from a convention or something.
No, and and so the initial video that popped up was just like a cop like pushing her to the ground and cuffing her, and then removing her from the protest, and she's shouting, like you can't do this. I'm a professor. Yeah. And so when everybody initially saw the video, she was a very sympathetic figure because they're like, okay, this is a woman. Like, I don't know how old she is. I'm guessing she's like 50s.
I would guess
And
mid 50s.
and here she is being brought to the ground by a police officer. And so like she was a very sympathetic figure. And then after a few hours, like what happened is like there was another video where she was actually being walked off campus by the police officer, and somebody's recording her and is like, what happened? What happened? And she said, well, they were, I forget how she described the situation, but there was a cop who was arresting a student. And she said, I just went over and I was tapping him on the head and I was saying, stop this, stop this. And the reason I saw that video is because there was a defense attorney who tweeted out the video and said, this is every defense attorney's worst nightmare. Right. And it's like, you cannot, if a cop is in the middle of arresting someone, you cannot be, tapping them on the head. That's,
As a rule, I just don't tap cops on the head.
Well, yeah. I mean, and so
there are things I don't do.
But I mean, that's the thing is like, it's just an example of people let emotions get the best of them and they do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. But a lot of that is like, she very clearly did not think that she had done anything wrong, and, but you can't hit a cop on the head while they're arresting someone. That's pretty,
or in general.
Right. Yeah. But like, but the thing is though, is like, you, in the middle of an arrest, this is a very tense situation, right? The cop is trying to restrain somebody. His adrenaline is going. There's a huge crowd around him. It's very, very stressful. And so when you get tapped on the head, like these things are, you're gonna elicit an emotional response from him as well. And so like you can't let emotion get the best of you, and you have to know what you are and are not allowed to do.
So what's the motivation for these protests? Like, whoever's behind it. I mean, I think I know who generally is behind it, but I won't make that accusation here. Whoever is behind it, what is the motivation?
Well, I think it's a coalition of a lot of people, actually. So, I mean, I think some of the people who are supporting these things are just the same people who kind of just support any kind of chaos that they can create. I think that some people are going to these things because they legitimately believe this is a good cause, and that they're just, this is what they're, and some of those people are well educated about that. Some of the people are not well educated about it. Some of the people are just out there because their friends are out there. Some of them are out there because they think it's the cool thing to do. Some of them are out there because they've been fed this ideology of sort of like, the oppressed versus the oppressor. And so that's how they filter and frame everything that they observe. And so, naturally they're inclined to protest the oppressor. But I think you have groups also that like to sow controversy, that like to create conflict, that like to heighten the contradictions, right? That like to provoke interactions and potentially violence between groups, and that's the problem that I have. Like, if you're just out there expressing your First Amendment rights and you're doing so peacefully, then good for you. Like, sure. I don't care what your view is. Like, that's your right. That's what makes this country great. If you're out there deliberately to turn things violent, then you shouldn't. You have no business being out there at all, and we should be asking you questions about why you're out there trying to provoke violence. Now, I mean, some of these people might just be sociopaths, right? Like, I mean, people who just enjoy provoking confrontation are going to be inclined to show up at protests because, like, what a great opportunity for you. Like, this is, like, you love to do those things and you show up. But right, but some people are showing up to do it, for deliberate purposes. They want to provoke this. They want to make the other side look bad. They want to make it look as though they're being put upon, by the people in power, that they're the oppressed, fighting for the oppressed all around the world. And I think that some element of that is deliberate, and I think it's harmful.
Okay, so what do you read? And I know you're an economics professor. You're not a sociologist, a psychologist, but I'm curious. Just your thoughts. You're a pretty rational, calm person. At North Carolina, and hopefully your friend calls in. But at North Carolina, the boys, the fraternity boys, and I can't remember the name of their fraternity. I apologize to whatever fraternity it is. I don't remember. Seem like nice kids, normal looking American kids. They protect the flag, and it goes viral. and someone starts a GoFundMe for them to have a rager, a fraternity party. That's up to more than $400,000 right now. I don't know the exact number. It doesn't really matter. It's one hell of a rager. They're actually not using it for a rager, by the way. They're endowing a scholarship, and they're going to be able to do other things with this money too. But what does it tell you, Josh? I'm curious that people have seen that, this protecting the flag, a group of 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids, young men, protecting the flag, rallying around kind of each other, looking like kind of wholesome all-American kids, showing some patriotism, which is kind of frowned upon sometimes in our country these days. And people have responded to it with, probably by the time we get through recording, $500,000. What is, for them to, quote, have a rager? I think most people know they're not going to go out and just buy all the tequila in Chapel Hill. But what does that say? I mean, because it tells me, and I told you this earlier, I don't know if we had a chance to finish because you've had a busy day, I've had a busy day. It tells me that there's kind of a tide turning a little bit. Like you saw it at Tuscaloosa yesterday, where frankly, both sides chanted the same thing, the great unifier. We talked about what happened at Ole Miss today, where frankly, Ole Miss redeemed itself, not that it had to redeem itself, but Ole Miss showed itself pretty well. But the $500,000 for a bunch of fraternity boys who just did the right thing to have a big party. What does that tell you?
Well, this is what I emphasize to people all the time is that
Pi Kappa Phi, the men of Pi Kappa Phi. I apologize. I'm glad someone pointed that out to me. Pi Kappa Phi. Good for them. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that we're in a situation where there's a lot of preference falsification going on, right? So people see things going on that they don't like, but they see like a sort of what appears to be a uniformity of opinion about those things. And so when they see that uniformity of opinion, they think that they are in like a significant minority, right? Like they think, I believe this, but I don't think that anybody else believes this. Like, I think like this is just something I believe in. When you have that feeling, the natural thing to do is to keep it to yourself. But I think like we've talked about this before is that there's this characteristic when you have like these big events, and like the quintessential one is sort of like revolution. If you read the newspaper before the revolution and they're making fun of the revolutionaries, it's this small group of guys, they're completely inept, they're never going to do anything, right? But then you read the paper a couple days after the revolution and it's like, well, this is obvious, like people are sick and tired of the regime and like this is just what happened. And so it's like, how do you explain that? And you explain that through preference falsification. What happens is that people are not revealing how they really feel about things in public because they think that their views are not the acceptable views, or they think that their views are not ideas that other people share, right? Like if they when you think about a revolution, like they don't like the king or something like that, but they think that like they're the only one who doesn't like the king. Everybody else seems to like him, and but the thing is that what happens is that the way that this breaks up is it breaks up very, very abruptly, and then it goes quickly. So what happens is like somebody stands up and says something, and then that signals to these other people, oh, hey, wait a minute. Like,
I'm not alone.
Yeah, that person's on my side.
Yeah.
And if they can say it, then, I can go ahead and say it because there's other people out there like me. So then they start saying it, and it becomes this and it becomes this cascading effect where people hear other people agreeing with them on something, and then they all just kind of start to say it. And so you get this outpouring. And I think that's a lot of what's going on is I think people are looking at all this chaos that are going on in all these universities, and they're looking for somebody to do something. Like they're looking for somebody to be the adult in the room. And the amazing thing about it is the adults in the room were like these guys from the fraternity at North Carolina, right?
Yeah.
And so they...
Well, I mean, go back and finish your thought. There's been something on my mind and it dovetails with this, but go ahead. Sorry, I apologize.
But I think that's the thing is like finally they saw somebody. And actually, I think it helps that they're like just guys in a fraternity, because I think they're like, if those guys They're just like college kids.
Yeah.
They're in a fraternity. These are guys that you would expect to just be having a good time. They don't care about like what's going on campus or something. And then all of a sudden they're the ones who are standing up, not the administration, not anybody else, not the actual people who are supposed to be the adults in the room, right? But this group of college kids, and they stand up, and then it sort of empowers people, because then they start to think like, if they can do that, then I can also speak. I can also say what I think. I can also do these things. And so I think that's what it is that like the GoFundMe is kind of illustrating how many people are kind of like, yeah, like I've been waiting for somebody to do this. Like, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Because if
Yeah.
you look at the donations, like, I mean, there are like, like I told you, like Bill Ackman donated like 10 grand or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
But if you look at the donations, like most people are,
$20.
yeah, it's like $10, $20, $50, right? Like that's what they're doing.
Oh, I mean, I think people saw it and goes,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to throw a rager for these guys.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, you know what? I'm in for a case.
Yeah.
I'm in for here. Get some Bud,
Yeah.
right? Get some Miller Lite, whatever the case.
But I think it illustrates that, there are a lot of people who are kind of fed up with this stuff, and they're waiting for somebody to stand up. And so when somebody stands up, all of a sudden there's overwhelming support for them, because finally here is somebody who's doing what they've been waiting for somebody to do this entire time.
Yeah. Revolution doesn't typically start with a group of people getting together on Tuesday night going, so, hey, here's what we're going to do. Let's revolt Thursday morning. And here's the objective. I was watching, if you listen to Mind on My Money already today, you've heard some of the story. And if it's repetitive, I apologize. And thank you for listening to our podcast. By the way, speaking of thank you, Kyle Wilson, thank you for the super chat. He says, love the podcast. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate that very much. But it was a documentary about Bunker Hill, which actually happened on Breeds Hill, not Bunker Hill, but regardless. And it was just kind of it did some backstory about how they got there. In the original colonial revolution was not really, hey, let's form our own country. That really wasn't it. It was, man, the king is taxing the hell out of us. Like, this is stupid. The taxes are just too much. This isn't fair. We'd really love it if you guys would reconsider our tax rates, lower them a little bit, let us keep more of our money. We're trying to do things here. We're trying to start businesses. We're trying to build Massachusetts. And the king's response was basically, F you. We've had all these wars. You're going to pay for them. You're a dirty little colonist. And it kind of built up and built up and built up. But it didn't happen like overnight. They didn't go, like I said, they didn't say, hey, Tuesday night, listen, if this isn't better by Friday, like, we're going to go man up arms. We're going to go up to Beacon Hill, Bunker Hill uphill over Boston, and we're going to start firing on the British. We're going to gather in Concord and Lexington, and we're going to hit them. That's not how it worked. We don't teach that anymore because we've turned the American Revolution into a cartoon, because it doesn't really meet the current American narrative, right? We all pay 40-something% of our money to taxes, and we all just go, oh, that's cool. Yeah. Oh, no. I would never ask where it goes. No, it's none of my business where my money goes. You go to a restaurant, you don't go, yeah, here's $200. Just give me and the fam whatever you feel like. It's all good. And they bring you like a couple of tuna sandwiches and say, on your way. No. You kind of know what you're paying for. There's a menu. There's a price over on the side, chicken parms, $19. You know it. You got the whole deal. But we've gotten away from that. But back then, with the colonists, they knew exactly what was coming out of their money. They were paying, and they were revolting against it. But the revolt took time. It took years and years and years to finally build up. And then all of a sudden, they're on Breeds Hill, and the British are coming up the mountain, up the hill, and they're looking down at them, and they don't have much gunpowder. And it's the reason that the guy leading them said, wait till you see the whites of their eyes. It wasn't because it was only because we can't spare any gunpowder. We can't miss. We have to be effective with our shots. And they lost that battle, by the way. I mean, it wasn't this linear thing where we just cruised right to a nation and then everything was fine. but I see that, like, it was interesting because if you go back to the American Revolution, we see these people, Washington and Hamilton and Jefferson and Monroe and all them, as frankly these old looking men. It's total bullshit. They were young. They were guys in their 20s. I mean, they risked everything, right? And so it is. I'm not saying that we're on the cusp of a revolution in our country, though I kind of sometimes wonder if we are. And when I say revolution, Josh, I don't mean like we're going to take up arms and let's get after it, but like people seem to be fed up a little bit with some of the just rancor, and no one believes the media. Nobody really trusts government. Not really. And I think there's a lot. I'm around young people. You are too. You teach them every day. I get a sense that they're like, man, I'm kind of tired of this. I want to get a job and make money and have a family and have fun and be able to afford Cowboys tickets and, all that stuff. I get that sense. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of what was evident with that support for the UNC protest is actually like the manifestation of what I hear from people, because there are a lot of people who are just kind of fed up with stuff. There are a lot of people who complain privately about, ridiculous things that are going on in the world and in our society. But when I hear this, a lot of those people, like, they don't want to talk about it. Now, young people, I don't blame them. Like, that you have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't be, you shouldn't be talking about this stuff. But like people, but setting aside students, right? Like I hear this from ordinary people all the time who just like say like, oh, I can't say that, or I can't, I'm not, I just don't talk about that. Like, I only talk about it with people that I know that, are either likely to agree with me or at least like know who I am well enough that they'll, listen to me and we can have a civilized conversation and they can tell me why I'm wrong or something. And but the thing is that, yeah, so many people just seem to be not talking about things and just taking things that they don't believe just by talking to other humans. There are so many things that that they don't believe, but they just kind of like go along with it. They kind of just think it'll. I mean, some of them I think don't want to say anything, but some of them I also think they don't say anything because they think, oh, like all this stuff's just a fad, like it'll pass, it'll go away. I don't really need to worry about it. And maybe that's right, but generally, like, it doesn't just die off. Like what happens is like somebody counters that and then it dies off, right? The thing that makes it a fad is that once kind of people reveal that like they think this idea is silly or something like that, then people all quickly just pivot to like, yeah, of course, it is kind of silly. Like we're done with this.
Corey Hamill in the chat says, imagine what they'd think about today's taxes if the 2-cent T-tax pissed them off. I mean, if you ever allow yourself to go down that thought hole and think about what George Washington and Alexander Hamilton and Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe and John Adams and all of those people would have thought about current American tax rates and what we send overseas to other countries.
I saw this great video. I saw this great video of this girl. She was like in her early 20s, and it was just like it was like a video she made in like her apartment, and she's like explaining taxes to people. And so it was very clear, like she had never really thought about this before. Yeah. And she was like, guys, like I work and then I make this amount of money, but then I only get this amount on my check. And so they're just taking out those taxes. But so I've already paid those taxes, but then like I go to the store and I buy things and then they charge me taxes, on that stuff.
Yeah.
And then she's like, and then I have this savings account and I put my money in the savings account. And then at the end of the year, the bank sent me a tax form that says that I owe money on the interest, on taxes, on the interest that I made on the money that I saved. And it's
a scam.
And she was just like going through this and explain like, and she's like, and she starts like, you can see her, like she's doing the math in her head and she's thinking about like, what percentage of my income actually disappears after I pay all of these taxes every step along the way, right? That like what comes out of your paycheck that's not the end, right? There's more taxation going on. And I think that and well, and I think the thing is like what's amazing about this, right, is that we do all of that. And we still never have enough money to pay for stuff. We still are like, wow, we got to borrow again. Like, well, like another $1 trillion. Let's,
I think I told you this. So my daughter, she got she graduated back in May a year ago, and she got her first job, and it included a signing bonus that she was psyched up about, of course, as any 22-year-old would be. I'm not making fun of Campbell here. It's funny. In her mind, she had plans for the entire bonus.
Right.
And she gets the bonus, and it's like 60% of what the bonus was supposed to be. And she calls, and she's like, do I say something? And I'm like, yeah, you should absolutely call the federal government and say something. And she said, what should I say? You're not thinking I was serious. And I said, you should tell them off, Yeah. But I mean, it was that realization of, oh my God, no wonder you lost your shit once a year in the spring when you and your accountant would fight about how much money is coming out of your account. And I've long said the solution to this, and it'll never happen, never ever. I mean, I will grow hair and a unicorn horn and wings, dragon wings, before this happens. Let everybody have all their money. And then once a year or once a quarter, whatever you want to do, you got to go to the county courthouse and fork it over. Here's your state taxes. Here's my federal taxes. Here's my Social Security. Let the money leave your hand, and you will want accountability for that money. That is, and I'll give the people that set up the current system so that there would be no revolt, brilliant. Because now you have people that don't ever think of that money as theirs, even though they're working until right about this time each year for free until they start getting their money, if you think about it.
Well, and it's probably anybody who's ever had to pay like estimated taxes. You're just fed up, right? Because every week or every 2 weeks or whatever your pay period is, like, you're getting your paycheck and they're taking all these taxes out. And then, after 3 months, they're like, oh, you got to send us this check for even more money.
Yep.
And so when you have to do that, it really forces you to think about, like, what are they spending this money on? Where does this go exactly? Like, what do they do with this?
You are reading my mind.
Yes.
Right now.
What do they do with this money?
You are living my world.
And
yep.
And so when you do that, well, and that's all. The other remarkable thing is, like, even when people get a tax refund, I've never understood this at all. Like, there are people who get like really excited about a tax refund, and I'm always like, that means you paid too much.
Yeah.
That means like they've been just holding on to your money this whole time. And then they gave it back to you. Like, that was, and and they didn't, and unlike a bank, they didn't pay you any interest.
And if you pay anticipated taxes, you don't ever even get that back. They just tell you, hey, why don't we just apply this?
We'll just apply it to your estimated taxes. Yeah.
All right. There was a couple questions already. I want to get to one. One person, and I don't remember the exact. I have to go find it, but it was about stagflation. That's a word that's been flying around a little bit the last week or two, Josh. And when you read that word, it's a little scary. It's the economy is stagnant, inflation is high, and unemployment is high. Right now, we're not in stagflation because unemployment is not high. But there are some economists out there who say we are headed towards stagflation and it's going to be rough. Do you subscribe to that?
I think it's a concern, and I think one of the reasons it's a concern is that generally what happens when you try to bring inflation down is that inflation comes down and economic activity comes down. But then what generally happens is that, you just get a slowdown in economic activity. Maybe you get a recession or something like that, but then you kind of like recover and you get back to normal. And so the issue here is that, and this has been one of my concerns all along, is they raised rates and they raised rates and they raised rates, and they were like, we're going to get inflation down. And but the issue is that you have to be very, very careful about how you do this, because you don't want to, because if rates are restrictive, which they are, you don't want to leave them there permanently. So what that means is, like, when you get inflation down, then what's going to happen is that once inflation gets down, then you should kind of lower rates, not back to zero, but like, from 5.5% to 5 or something like that, or 5.5 to like 4.75 or something.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so if you look at how the Fed was talking like 6 months ago, I mean, that's basically what they were saying. It's kind of like, hey, look, pretty soon we're going to start lowering rates, right? We're going to, and the word they kept using is like, we're going to normalize rates, which basically meant like right now we have a restrictive policy. We need to get to a more neutral policy once inflation comes down.
Okay.
But the problem is like in the 1970s, we had this issue a lot. And we had this issue a lot because when you're making monetary policy, you shouldn't be looking at the data. Like, you shouldn't be making decisions based on the data that you observe. You should be using that data to make a forecast about what you think is going to happen in the future. And you should be making your policy decision based on what you expect to happen, given the information you have now. Because whatever inflation was last month, I can never change that as a policymaker. That's it. That happened, right? And so what I have to do is I have to pay attention to the path of inflation over time and what it's doing. I have to pay attention to other economic conditions. And I have to use that information to say, okay, where do I think inflation is going to be in 3 months, 6 months? And then based on that, that's how I formulate policy. But what happened in the 1970s is they were basically making policy based on observations. So what would happen is like inflation, so initially they would make it based on expectations. So inflation would start to come down. They would expect that it was going to continue to come down. And economic activity started to slow. So what they would do is they would say, oh, we're going to normalize rates. We're going to lower them. And then as they would lower them, then what started happening is like inflation started going back up. So then they would say, oh, inflation's higher now, so now we're going to increase rates. And then inflation would start to come down, and it looked like maybe we're going into a recession. And they go, oh, we think we're going into a recession, so now we're going to lower rates. And it was just this stop, go policy. And the ultimate result of this is that people started to anticipate that anytime unemployment goes up, they're going to lower rates. And anytime inflation goes up, they're going to raise rates. And so people just adapted their expectations to this. And so what started to happen is you started to just end up with permanently high unemployment and permanently high inflation at the same time. And so one of the concerns that I have now is that, the Fed might make the same mistake, is that they might be paying too much attention to past data and then making decisions based upon that. But also the recent data that's come out is essentially showing that the Fed has a much, much harder job like ahead of them. And the reason is that if you look at something like nominal income growth in the economy, generally when the Federal Reserve is like neutral on policy, like nominal income, so that's just dollar income, not adjusted for inflation, is growing at about 5% a year. And that's usually when the Fed is neutral, because if income growth falls below that, they tend to expand policy. If income growth gets above that, they tend to contract policy. And so it tends to hover around 5%. But when it hovers around 5%, that's usually split between growth and inflation's about 2%. And so you've got like real income growth, which is about 3%, and then you've got inflation, which is 2%, and then they add up to nominal growth, which is 5%.
Okay.
But what we have now is we have a situation where nominal income growth is back to 5%, which says that the Fed should be switching to a neutral posture. But inflation is still like 3.5%.
They thought it would have been closer to 2 by now.
Right. And so the problem is that inflation is still very high above their target.
Why?
Well, I think there's a lot of persistent effects. I also think that like one of the things that helps bring down inflation when you raise rates aggressively is that it slows economic activity. But we're not getting that slowdown in economic activity because we've got like fiscal policy, the gas pedal of fiscal policy, right? Government spending. We've got that gas pedal just pushed down to the floor, right? And so you've got monetary.
Hey, those weapons don't grow on trees, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so monetary policy is kind of slowing things down, but then like fiscal policy is kind of like speeding things up.
Yeah.
And so what And so, the net effect here is that you've got higher inflation that they would like, but like nominal income growth is telling them that like, hey, they should stop, that like that they should actually lower rates a little bit. And the problem is that the general public is not like the way that the Fed communicates to the general public. Like, there's no way that anybody is going to understand that dilemma that they face, because they entirely talk about inflation relative to their target. So if they were to come out and say, hey, we're going to lower rates, everybody immediately is going to be like, what in the world are you talking about? You're going to lower rates, right? Inflation is still 3.5%. But if they don't lower rates, then like the thing that you have to worry about is like, well, then maybe nominal income continues to fall. And as nominal income continues to fall, what's the split between inflation and real income? Because if it continues to fall, but real income, doesn't, just kind of grows at a slower rate, you can just end up with like really low growth, higher unemployment, higher inflation, and maybe not as bad as the 70s, but like not great. Like you don't want, 7% unemployment and 4% inflation. That's not what we're used to. That's not what we want. And so I think that, but I think that that is a possibility, because the Fed now finds itself in a very, very difficult spot. And I think the Fed, and I think this is part of this is the Fed's doing, because like the Fed was sort of very confident, like, oh look, we lived through the 1980s and we know how to bring down inflation. See, we've done it before. And it's like, well, yeah, but like it's not like central banking is an art more so than a science, right? Like you're just looking at the data and you're making the best decision that you can given the data that's available to you, right? And so like, yeah, there's some degree of science there in the sense that like you can forecast stuff and you can do all this fancy math. But the thing is that at the same time, it's not like a machine, right? You can't just adjust the dials to get the outcomes that you want, and so you don't really necessarily know what the outcome of those higher rates are going to be. And we're getting into a scenario where we've talked about this before. As I said, the second half of 2024 is when a lot of this corporate debt starts to roll over. And when that corporate debt starts to roll over, that debt, they were borrowing at much lower rates when they borrowed money. And now if they still, if they're not paying that off with their cash flows and they need to borrow more, they're going to have to refinance at higher rates than they had before. And at the same time, like the Fed has kind of been signaling that rates would actually be lower. And so companies have been making decisions based on the expectation that like, oh, well, the Fed says it's going to lower. And so, their prediction of like what it's going to cost to borrow is based on where they think that the Fed is going to go. And so now all of a sudden, if the Fed's like, we can't lower rates, well, now that's like a shock to the system, right? Because now all these people who were figuring, oh, this is how much we have to borrow, this is how much we're going to pay in interest, now all of a sudden it's more interest.
Yeah.
And so now it's going to be more costly. And now you got to factor that into your costs. And then you've got to decide, well, do we actually really want to do this or not? Or maybe we should cut back on some kind of expenditures. And once that happens, then that you're on the way to a recession.
I mean, there's a lot there. That was an incredible explanation. And I think it's why people worry about recession. I think it's why and this is not meant as a political slap at the current administration, but I think it's the reason they're almost banging the drum of, hey, the economy is not bad. It's good. Don't you see? It's good. And I get why. Because if it leads to what you're talking about, well, no one can win like that. I mean, history says people vote with their pocketbook on the incumbent. If the economy's great, look at Bill Clinton. I mean, he's embroiled in scandal, but the economy was rocking, and people were like, I don't care. That's Hillary's problem, right? I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
And if the economy is crushed by November, or it looks like it's being crushed, people are going to be like, you know what? Yeah, I didn't like his tweets, and I know he got convicted on the Stormy Daniels thingy that I don't really get why we're worked up about this, but F it. My 401k liked him a lot better. He's going to come in. He's going to change stuff. If the economy's rolling, people are going to go, I know he's a bumbling guy and all that, but hey, we're good. And I don't really want to go back to that guy. And I mean, I really think people vote that simply. I do think people vote with their pocketbook. And I think it's one of the reasons that you see the Biden reelection campaign banging the drum of, y'all, it's better than you think it is. Why do y'all think it's so bad? They seem truly baffled by that. And the reason is because if they can't change that, that is an awfully tall mountain to try to climb, even against a candidate as weak as Trump. And look, Trump's a weak candidate. Biden's a weak candidate. If you look at the polling, you see it. America doesn't like these people. They don't want this race. This is not what we want as a country. This isn't me talking. This is me reading data. This is what we have. Is a reason that RFK Jr., who's not a particularly strong candidate, is getting like 13% in places. It's a big number. It's because people don't like Biden. They're sick of him. They're like, he's going to die. And his running mate's the worst. We hate her. And then you got Trump, and it's constant. And he puts out his Truth Social things, and he gets everybody all worked up. And, you know, frankly, he didn't handle the pandemic all that great. And what's he going to do? And, hey, he's old too, right? I mean, there's all this stuff that you see in the polling data. And it's like, so people are going to kind of vote with their pocketbooks, I think. And right now, I think a lot of people are kind of getting nervous a little because people look at stuff and go, well, if the Fed's not ever going to lower these rates, does that mean the Fed's worried about where things are going?
Well, and the thing is that the Biden administration, like their biggest problem in terms of economic messaging is like they seem to not understand this at all, that like what I care about as a consumer is like I go to the grocery store and I know what I pay for things, right? Like
100%.
You know what you pay week in and week out. And yeah, there's fluctuations. But normally,
yeah, I mean, Laura usually does most of our shopping. I do some of it, but she typically does the majority of our shopping. And so she comes home on Sunday morning, midday, and I'll go out to the car and help her unload, right? We put everything up because we are, not to interrupt you, I'm just giving an example. Especially in football season where it gets so busy. A lot of times on Sunday, our deal is very simple. I finish 10 thoughts, and then I light up the grill, and we kind of cook ahead, right? Because Carson's going to have a soccer practice on Monday. He's got club on Tuesday. He's got another practice on Wednesday, club on Thursday, or the season comes around and they're playing at Horn Lake on Monday, a home against South Haven on Thursday. We got all this stuff going on, and if we don't cook ahead, well, we're spending $1 gazillion to run to Chick-fil-A at 10 o'clock. We don't want to do that. So we cook like, some flank steak or some chicken breast or all that stuff so that when he comes in from practice and he's ready to eat the house down, there's something for him to eat. And so if you don't do that ahead of time, you don't get it done. And I've got 3 podcasts on Monday, and I've got football all day Tuesday, and I've got football Wednesday, and I've got 6 podcasts on Thursday. It's just impossible, right? So we cook ahead. And so we kind of load up on Sunday and then get through the week. And what a couple of years ago was $250 for the big shop with more kids. Now I'll go out to the car and she's like, don't get mad. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to get mad. Well, how much was it? And she's like, it's $425. I'm like, what? It's this. And she's like, and it's the same thing. I didn't buy anything extra. I'm like, no, it's all good. I mean, but that's inflation. And so when you tell people there is no inflation, and people like me and you and her and others are like, no, there's a hell of a lot of inflation. You can't trick us.
Well, and what they don't understand is that no one cares about the inflation rate. What people when they're thinking about these things, what they really care about is they care about prices. So when you show up and you know what things cost, and all of a sudden everything seems to cost more, but your paycheck hasn't changed. Well, this is eating up a bigger percentage of your income than before. So now you got to make a decision. Okay, is there things that we could just cut out of this trip?
Yeah.
Or do I need to cut out something elsewhere? Mm-hmm. And when people are making those decisions, they don't like those decisions. People like more stuff. They don't like less stuff.
Of course.
And so if you have less stuff,
you don't want to cancel the family vacation.
Right.
You've looked forward to the family vacation.
Yes. And so you naturally are going to be like, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm upset. And the thing that they don't seem to realize is that you can say things like, look, inflation was 9%. Now it's 3.5%. It's come down. Like, why aren't you happy? And it's like, because it compounds, right? Because what that means is like when it goes up by 9% and then it goes up by 3.5%. Well, it's gone up by about 13% at that point. And so like total, right? Like it compounds on top of itself. So, the price goes up by 10%, this month, and then it goes up by 9% next month, and then it goes up by 8% the following month, and then 7% the following month. Yeah, inflation is coming down, but the price of that stuff is still going up, and not only that, it's going up at a pretty rapid rate that you're not accustomed to. And if your wages were going up by 10% a month, right, then you wouldn't even notice.
Whatever.
Yeah, you wouldn't even notice. You'd be like, oh, like you might like notice the dollar figure is more expensive, but it's not making a dent in your budget. And what's happening is that this is making a dent in people's budget. People are not happy with it, and they just don't seem to get this. Inflation compounds. It's a pretty basic concept.
All right, we have some questions. Let me see if I can find some. There were a bunch, and it's my fault. Let's see. Andrew Sego, who sponsors my 10 Weekend Thoughts. Andrew, thanks to have you with us. He wanted to get your thoughts on the Japanese yen.
Yeah, so I think, so for people who don't know, the yen has been depreciating very, very rapidly lately versus the dollar. So I think what's really going on here is like Japan was really trying to do like yield curve control. So what they were doing is they were trying to use monetary policy to keep interest rates low, okay, and like long-term interest rates. But the only way that you do that is like you use monetary policy, you buy long-term bonds that pushes the rate down. But then the market looks at what you're doing and thinks, oh, well, that's probably going to lead to inflation. And so I probably don't want to hold this bond that pays such a low interest rate. And so the market starts to sell off these bonds and the yield starts to creep up. And so what does the Japanese central bank do? They go in and they buy more of those bonds to push the interest rate back down. And then so they just become the buyer that's keeping this interest rate pegged to a certain low level. The problem is like you can't do this. You obviously cannot do this forever, right? Like you can't continue to just push the rate lower and lower and lower.
Right.
It's like trying to hold the ball underwater. Yeah, you can hold the ball underwater, but like the second that your hand moves just a little bit, that ball is going to sneak out and it's going to pop up out of the water. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing with the yen is they've been artificially trying to lower these rates and doing so by expanding their balance sheet. And then they kind of abandoned that policy. So at a certain point, they said, okay, we can't keep this interest rate down. And so if we can't keep this interest rate down, like we're just going to have to abandon the policy. But then they didn't promise to, rein in their balance sheet or anything like that afterwards. They just kind of said, we're going to abandon, this interest rate target. And so what's happening now is that ball's been held underwater. And now there's nothing holding it underwater anymore. So now it's popping out of the water, which means that it's going to it's sort of rapidly depreciating because it was sort of being artificially held down by these policies.
Austin wants to know, why do you believe that the minority of public opinion gets so much media attention? And secondly, if the quiet majority spoke up, would this end it all? Would this all end, he says?
So the first part, the reason is obvious. It's because the minority is also the elite. So this is elite opinion, and so this
is your journalism.
Yeah, the people who are the people who are politicians, they're going to school with the journalists, and so they're all going to these elite schools. They're all going to they all hang out in the same places. They all are in the same social circles.
Their kids go to the same schools. Yep. They're in the same PTOs. They hang out at the same pubs. Yep.
And so the thing is like they all already kind of share these common views because they all have the same education. They all have the same
it's an echo
general
chamber.
Life experience. Yeah. And so what happens is like they, and you periodically see this, right? Like I think we talked about this a couple months ago, the woman who was like, there are people in this country who think that your rights come from God and that they don't come from the government. And it's like, yeah, that's called the Constitution, right? Like,
exactly.
And like this is
people.
This is the Declaration of Independence. This is the Constitution, though those views were pretty clearly articulated. But the thing, but
in blood, basically.
But the thing is like people say things like this because they're in a bubble, they're in an echo chamber, and this is elite opinion, and also like the elite opinion is not to be political, but like the elite opinion is very, very progressive. And so because the elite opinion is progressive, like that's that's kind of what you see. And so, but that's but the people who strongly hold those views, I do think that those people are a minority. It's just that those people are in positions of power. Those people are in journalism, and those people are, so
They're the ones with the
control,
microphone.
yeah, and so they're the ones communicating these things, and then that gets the message out. I mean, I think in terms of like how the majority responds to this, I think, first and foremost, I think that the focus really needs to be on local stuff. Like the focus really needs to be on like start local, focus on local stuff, control, like, because that's where you have the most influence. Like your vote actually matters when you vote on the school board election, right? Your vote actually matters when you're voting for a councilman or an alderman or whatever. Like your vote actually matters in those.
Your vote for mayor matters.
Yeah. And so like those things really matter. Like also just like being involved in communities. Like we talked about, we've talked about this before. Like the South is very, very good at this. I mentioned this before that like when I moved here, like the first question every single person I met would ask me is like, where do you go to church? And like as somebody who grew up in the Midwest, it was kind of like, what? Like what? Like what? Why do you care? Like why do you care about like my religion? And the thing is like they don't care about your religion at all. I mean, they might, but for the most part, they don't care about it at all.
Yeah.
What they realize is that if they know what church you go to, they know the other people who go to that church, right? And so now they have a connection to you. Now they have like, now they have some way of relating to you. Oh, so and so.
Yeah, Sally and Bob. Yeah,
and
yeah, sure.
But also because like those places are a source of community, right? Because if you if you go to their church, now they're going to look for you, right? Now they're going to talk to you. They're going to invite you to things, right? They're going to make sure you're involved in like whatever's going on at the church and these kinds of things. First of all, this is how America used to work, like period. But like now, this is something that's very, very unique to the South. Like lots of other places, they have like that community, but it's very isolated. Right, like you might have your church and everybody's got their, and so all the people who go to that church, they do all the same sorts of stuff, but there's not like there's no element of like, I don't know, cross pollination there, right? Like there's no like, oh, where do you go? Oh, I know so and so, that's my neighbor, and they go there or something. Like there's not really a lot of that stuff once you get out of the South, and I think that, but so the South has an advantage, is what I'm saying. Is because they've already got a lot of this local infrastructure in place, but then what you can do is you start local, but as you start local, you have to realize that like the people who are successful at the local level are eventually they can all of a sudden those are the next people up for the state level, and those are the next people up at the federal level, and so you've got to start there, and you've got to get the right people in place, and you got to encourage the people who you would want saying those things and representing you to get ahead.
All right, Joey wants to know, he says, I'm finishing my master's in both finance and economics while working full-time. Do you believe a PhD is only worth it if the end goal is to teach?
Probably. I would say only get a PhD if you really, if you really want to get a PhD, then go get a PhD. If you really want to, I mean, if you want to be in academia, you're going to have to get a PhD. If you don't want to be in academia, then you've got a lot more options. But only get a PhD if you really feel like you have to have it. And I don't think for the private sector you're going to have it. I think the master's is going to prepare you pretty well.
Yeah, Tupelo wants to know, I'm answering his question. He says, wait, what's the third podcast on Monday? Tupelo's right. Usually it's just two on Mondays, but that wasn't really the point. The point was we have to have a plan. We have to be kind of organized to get through the week, especially when we had like dance and soccer. And you're like, okay, and I got to drive him to Tupelo. It's a little better now because he can drive himself to Tupelo. But when I had to drive to Tupelo and it was, all right, we're leaving at 5:30 for Tupelo. We're not getting back until 9:30. Yeah, you had to have an effing plan. I mean, you had to be organized. You had to be functional, and so you had to almost meal prep. And so when you meal prep, you do it on Sunday, and when you meal prep, you kind of can adhere to a budget. And when the budget goes from, I don't know, just making up numbers, $250 a week to $450 a week, and there's one less mouth to feed in the house, you do take a step back and go, whoa, Like, what are we doing? Are we buying the wrong thing? No, I'm buying the same thing. In fact, I'm even going cheaper with stuff. But everything's more expensive. Bacon's more expensive. Eggs are more expensive. Milk is more expensive. Bread's more expensive. Everything's more expensive. So, yeah, that's what happens. It's not complicated. I think that's why you see so many people are disillusioned. And if you have people who are on a strict budget because they don't make much money, well, it's a crisis. For people like you and me who do fairly well, it's a complaint. We might have a conversation with, hey, you might not need to go get your nails done this week. Maybe I need to drop that golf club thing. That's one thing. But if it's, maybe we can't afford to have meat half of the week. What's another thing? It's a totally different conversation. And when that starts happening in mainstream America, I go back to my revolt. People push back. What's the expression? We're always 3 days away from a revolution.
Well,
let people go hungry for 3 days, and you see desperation, and desperation leads to things. And I'm not saying we're there at all, but not even in the least. But when people's grocery bill doubles, that's a problem.
Well, and that's the problem with inflation is sort of like this hidden tax, right? Like all of a sudden everything costs more. It's no different than if they just put a tax on it, right? Like now they've made this stuff more expensive, and they did this with policy. But the thing is like it's hidden from you, right? Like you don't, there's no announcement that, oh, hey, this is going to be more expensive now. No, it's just like you show up at the store and like, oh, look, everything costs more. And, and then you just have to deal with it. And that's not what people should deal with.
Well, and you don't typically walk through the store. At least I don't. Maybe I'm sure there are people who do. They're the coupon people who I used to make fun of, who are now like, man, you guys were kind of on top of something. Good for you. But, like if you walk through the store and you leave the store and you go home and 30 minutes later, I call you and go, all right, Josh, quiz time. Paper towels cost what? You might not get that right. Or, hey, Josh, that dozen eggs that you bought, how much was that? You might get in ballpark, but you probably won't know precisely. You won't go, oh, that was $2.99 or whatever, right? So when 3 weeks later, and I'm just making numbers up, by the way, $2.99 is $4.19. You might not notice item by item. You don't notice till the end when the big tally comes in. And you're like, holy shit, what happened? What'd we do? Well, they raised the price on everything. That's what you did. And then, like I was saying this today on McCready and Siskey, I don't go out to eat much. I don't go out much at all, but I hadn't been to Chick-fil-A in forever. I have nothing against Chick-fil-A. They're like a machine. Right? And I like their food. It's fine. But I'm a natural fat ass, so I have to be really careful with what I eat because I gain weight like that. But I took Carson and his teammate, Asiel, who plays with him at OHS and also on Tupelo Football Club, to Vicksburg last weekend for their state qualifying match, which I now wish they had lost, but they won. And anyway, we stopped in Madison at Chick-fil-A, and normally, like Carson, I now know Carson normally, my son, will eat like a combo meal, and he'll get grilled tenders and he'll get a milkshake and the whole deal because he's a kid. And now I understand why when I gave him, like when they played, I'm jumping around. I promise I'm getting to the point. They played a game last season at South Haven. And after the game, he always rides back with his team on the bus. And I'm like, hey, you need some money? And he's like, yeah, can I get some money? I'm like, yeah, sure. Because I knew they were going to stop and get something to eat. And so I gave him $20 thinking that'll be more than enough because I don't ever go out. I don't ever go to fast food places. I'm totally out of touch, right? And I'm thinking for him, $20, he'll be good. He'll pocket $10 of that. Turns out he had to borrow $5 from one of his buddies to cover his meal. And I went, what you eat? Now I know. So I got a combo meal. ACL got a combo meal. Carson got a combo meal. It was like $40. And I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. I mean, we weren't like gorging ourselves. Nobody got any extra things. Nobody got a milkshake or whatever, because they were thinking, hey, we're about to go play a soccer game in the heat. And I was thinking, this is so many more calories than I need. And so we didn't get that much. There wasn't that much food. $40. That's crazy if you think about that just exponentially.
No, it is. I mean, in the Biden administration's their line on this, like, I don't know if you ever watched Arrested Development, but there's this famous scene with the mom, and she's like, "It's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10." and like that's their messaging, right? Like their messaging is like, like who cares? Like, like, oh, banana, it's more expensive. Like, what is it? And people feel it. Like you got to make different decisions because of like how prices have changed.
Yeah. All right. In the thread, people are asking about Trump. Should he go ahead and name his VP? It's May. He still has time.
I mean, I think it depends on who it is.
Tulsi Gabbard.
I doubt it. I think it depends on who it is. Like if it's somebody who can go out and be kind of a good messenger in the media, then it wouldn't be the worst thing to name them sooner rather than later, because then while he's stuck in the courtroom, somebody can be out there getting the message out for the campaign. But if you're not going to pick somebody like that who can go out and give those rah-rah speeches, then maybe delay it a little longer, because then you then instead you're building suspense. People don't know who you're going to pick.
Am I crazy in saying this? That to me, there's an obvious choice.
Who do you think it is?
DeSantis.
I mean, that's who I would pick, because you could put him.
Okay, because here's why.
Yeah.
I get it's insensitive, but it's Trump. He's not a sensitive guy. I mean, today he tweeted that he's not falling asleep in the courtroom. He's just closing his beautiful blue eyes and thinking. I mean, the guy doesn't care, right?
Yeah.
Don't you have to run against Biden he's 82. And he's not, look, my parents are 82. My parents look a lot better and sound a lot better and move a lot better than Joe Biden. And my dad's had both knees replaced. He moves better than Joe Biden. They're both sharper than Joe Biden. My mom's like 1,000,000 times sharper than Joe Biden. But you're 82. And when you're 82, you're always kind of a fall away from things getting rough. And that's just reality. Don't you have to run against Biden, whether you're Donald Trump or Nikki Haley or anybody else, going, hey, look, she's one heartbeat away. And that's not the strongest heart. Keeping it real. Do you really want her as your VP? And if you're Trump, you can then, man, I know I'm way off. I'm off the reservation now. You could say, I'm old too. Now, I'm not as old as he is. I'm more vigorous than he is, but I'm old. If something happens to me, you get him. He's better fit for this. You don't want her. See, to me, this is an opening that would appeal to middle America, because I think middle America looks at Kamala and goes, I don't know. I mean, because my message, if I'm running a Republican thing, is a vote for Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris.
The bus goes here and the bus goes there, because that's what buses do.
That's what buses do.
No, I mean, I think the reason to pick DeSantis is that, like, DeSantis is a very competent governor, and I mean that like in the literal sense. He knows how to govern, and so I think that is actually like something critical that the Trump administration needs. Is they need a guy that they can just assign jobs to do and just kind of let him go, lead people and tell them what to do and get, and get things done. I mean, if you really want to go in there and you want to clean up the bureaucracy, Why wouldn't you pick somebody like that? Because he's not afraid to go after the bureaucracy, and he's certainly not going to be afraid to do it as vice president, because what does he have to lose?
Yeah.
Like, if you're vice president, like, maybe you get to be president, maybe not, but like, an easy path would be to do popular things for the base, right? Like, you make yourself more popular.
Well, and look, Trump can't run for another term. He already had a term. Let's say he wins, then I mean that constitutionally he can't run again. So in one way he's a lame duck. In another way, he gets to kind of really govern. And if you're his VP, especially if you're a younger, vigorous, popular person, you have the absolute, I mean, front inside lane for the nomination in 26.
Well, and it's also a way, though, for Trump. I mean, it's a way to actually get things done without all the scrutiny, because, like, let's face it, like, Trump is going to take all of the attention.
Yeah.
And so if they're constantly just paying attention to, like, what Trump is tweeting, or, what he said at his, latest press conference or something like that, if Ron DeSantis is busy working and doing things, they can't be in two places at once. So if they're just covering Trump and paying attention to all the, all the crazy things that they think he says, then they're not paying attention to DeSantis, and that gives him a lot of cover to go in and clean up the bureaucracy, to go in and do these things that they say that they want to do.
You've been pretty consistent on this. You have always said that you think that it's certainly possible that there's going to be a surprise here, that it's not going to be Biden. We're in May now. We're 6 months away. We're running out of time, but there's still time. Do you still think it's Biden versus Trump in November?
Yeah, I think the problem is I think, like, I think that I really do think that they were kind of setting up Gavin Newsom as a backup plan, and Gavin Newsom has kind of fallen on his face quite a bit. And so
his debate against DeSantis, even though it wasn't mainstream and it was just on Fox News, and the left would never have watched it on Fox News, but people have heard about it. He hurt himself that night.
And I think that he's, like, what makes Gavin Newsom a good politician is that he actually just says whatever he thinks the room wants to hear at that moment, and he really doesn't get called on it because he doesn't have any difficult political foes in California, and so he's able to do that. And so he's just throwing red meat to the base just constantly, and so the base loves him. But when he's got to actually, like, tack back towards the middle and try to be likable, like, he's inherently unlikable. But he is a good politician, which is why I thought that they would try to replace him. But I mean, it's looking increasingly like we're going to get what we all expect, which is Trump and Biden. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if something happens, but I think there would have to be some evidence in the polling that things had really changed for them to try something like that at this point.
What do you make of the polling? Because the polling right now shows that Biden's in trouble in virtually every swing state.
Well, he should be. I mean, he's done a terrible job. He's old. He's feeble. He can barely speak. We're fighting. We're funding wars. All over the place. The administration provides, like, no real accountability on, like, what, in terms of, like, what our objectives are, or, like, why we're doing this or whatever. They just give us platitudes. And there's just a lot of headwinds in front of him. He's not very popular, and so I think that virtually anybody could poll well against him at this point, because he's incredibly unpopular, and he doesn't get the benefit of just being not Donald Trump this time, because now we've experienced the Biden presidency, so people have a sense of what it would be like, and they're realizing that it's not that great.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast that I listen to a lot, Breaking Points, and one of the hosts said, we're either going to have, he was talking about how history repeats itself. We're either going to have 1948, where somehow Truman won, even though people didn't like Truman. Things weren't great. It was post-World War II. Everyone thought Dewey would win. He was a popular governor of New York. Or we're going to have 1968, where we had riots. RFK was assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. There were riots at the Chicago Democratic Convention. The convention's back in Chicago this year, by the way, interestingly, or ironically, I should say. And that people were like, what are we doing? It's time for something different. And so they voted for Richard Nixon, who was a known quantity, but was basically out of the public light. I mean, he'd been the vice president for 8 years. He'd run against John F. Kennedy and lost, sort of disappeared, ran for governor of California and lost. And then 4 years later, he's the president of the United States, in large part because kind of the American populace was like, this is crazy, man. We've just done it. It's time for something different. And Trump's not different at all. He comes with his own set of problems, but Biden ran 4 years ago on, I'm going to be the unifier. I'm going to calm things down. There's not going to be any chaos anymore. Because there was chaos at the end of the Trump term. It was chaotic. It was. He didn't fulfill those promises. He didn't unify. There's lots of chaos. It's everywhere. We just spent 45 minutes to an hour talking about it. We're embroiled potentially in 2 wars that, in fairness to Trump, there was never a war. The one thing about Trump, whether it was because people thought he was crazy and they were scared of him, or I don't know, whatever it was, we didn't get on the cusp of war. And now you've got Lindsey Graham and others going, hey, we've got to take out Iran, which is like World War III. And so I do think that's interesting to kind of observe as we get closer to November, which is Biden is going to have to find something different to run on. In 2020, I think he ran on, I'm going to be the great unifier and I'm not Trump. And now all he can really run on is, I'm not Trump. And I don't know that in and of itself is enough for him.
No, I think the problem with Biden is that he was an alternative to Trump at a time when there were people looking desperately for an alternative to Trump. And he sold himself as like, I'm going to be a moderate. I'm going to be a unifier. But he's never really been a moderate. I mean, he's always been like, he's always been kind of crazy. I mean, if you just go look up some of his old speeches, like he's just like, I mean, seriously, go look up some of his old speeches. You see him giving a speech on the Senate floor, and like half the time he's like yelling, and like he's just, and he, he was a habitual liar. He's still a habitual liar, but like now, it's like a little bit more obvious because he's so like old and feeble that like when he tells the lies, it's like a little easier to see through. He doesn't say it as confidently as he used to. And so, like, I think people have just gotten to know who the guy is. And, like, I'm sorry, but until Obama picked him to be his running mate, like, I mean, he was kind of like, just like, he was just kind of like a senior senator from a particular state who on the national scene was never really anything, who was always desperate to be on the national scene, but was, like, never likable. I mean, if you just go back and you just look at coverage of him, throughout his career.
No, they made fun of him.
They were constantly making fun of him.
He was the gaffe machine.
Yeah. I mean, he was always saying something stupid. He was always acting smarter than he was. I mean, he would make up things that were easily verifiable. Like he would just say, like, I finished second in my class in law school, and then they would look it up and they'd be like, no, you didn't. And like stuff.
I'm curious. As we start to wrap up, I'm curious about this because I'm fascinated in politics, and you're one of the people that I think are able to sort of see big picture. I can remember, I grew up you and I are roughly the same age. I'm older than you, but I can remember in the 80s when Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. I was 11 years old. And my grandmother worshiped him. Was he understood? You couldn't say a bad word about Reagan. And Reagan he was good. I mean, he was. When he spoke to the nation, you sort of felt like, all right, he's one of us. He had kind of a grandfatherly deal. And then, it wasn't that much longer. Bill Clinton was this charismatic guy that came on the scene, and we talked about how even though he had all of his personal foibles, the economy was great. Everybody kind of loved Clinton and, whatever. And then Obama was this rock star when he came on. And now we've gone through these cycles where I think Obama's second term was a failure. It's my opinion. I think it was divisive. I think it's created the landscape that allowed Trump to win. The Democrats ran Hillary Clinton because they thought it was her turn, not because they ignored the polling data that showed that America hated her. It was the only person Trump could have beaten. He won because he was so different from her. He loses to Biden for any number of reasons, and now you have this election coming up. Is this just a cycle? Will we ever get back to having presidents or people that run for president that we like, or is this a new thing where the media is so nasty and caustic that anybody who would be worth having would never consider the job?
Well, I think. Well, I mean, I think the media is actually kind of to blame for this. I mean, if you think about, I mean, one of the problems, especially in the second term of the Obama administration, is that it was very obviously not like going great, and but there was no criticism whatsoever. So there was nobody, like the media wasn't criticizing the administration for virtually anything. And I think the problem is that when they're not when they're not criticizing, the administration for things where people think that they should be criticized for, right, you're going to interpret that as media bias. And to some degree, it is media bias, right? Because because they all live in this bubble, and they all have the same sort of experience. And so for them, um, it's you're observing this from the outside, and you're looking at the media who seems to be treating this guy with kid gloves. And so I think that in part created a perfect storm for Trump, because you had a segment of the electorate that kind of felt like Obama didn't get criticized, and so they're frustrated. Um, and and then on top of it, the Democrats were running Hillary Clinton, and so the combination of the frustration with the second Obama term and the unpopularity of Hillary kind of created a perfect storm for Donald Trump. And the issue that the Democrats have is, like, the Democrats have moved way to the left, and the electorate's not there, but their base is there. And so they got to figure out a way that they can win elections. But they've got to figure out this way that they can win elections, by picking somebody who's going to be, more moderate to the voters, but who, but they don't have a lot of those people. They've got a lot of firebrands. They've got a lot of, more left wing people. And so, it's just, I think we're kind of stuck where the Democratic Party is kind of to the left of the electorate, but they really know how to win elections, and they really know how to strategize. But so that what you're going to tend to get, end up with is, they're going to produce relatively unpopular people. And then on the other side, the Republicans have a problem because the party has been completely inept. Like, it doesn't actually accomplish anything. The voters don't feel like the party is accountable to them. And that's why they support Trump in the first place. Because they're like, well, he says he's going to do this, like, we might as well try it, right? Because the other people don't do it. And so I think that's, yeah, and so we're kind of just stuck in this current scenario. But I mean, I don't think we're stuck here forever, and I don't think that it's going to be this way, permanently. It's just a sort of period, and we'll just have to see how that how things evolve over time.
I'm resetting the little caller thing. So a couple people tried to call, and I've completely reset it. So hopefully we can get through. We've got a couple people that are asking to call, and I just realized that there was a problem. I don't know whether that's what that is, but on my list of things to fix before football season is this. It's really a small list. I will tell you this one. Paul Krugman left a voicemail message. He says, "I got a bone to pick with Josh Hendrickson." Do you know him?
That's going to be my friend John.
Okay. He says, "I believe his name is being right on everything, making me look bad. So calling in to make sure we stop that nonsense. Call me back." So I'm going to try to call him, see if it works. Here we go. I don't know why it's not connecting. I really don't. Let me see. I'm going to try this on a different thing. Let's see if I can do it on Skype. Let him know I'm going to be trying to call him on a Skype number.
Okay.
because it's not giving me that option there. All right, let's see. Okay. Let's see. I hadn't done this in a while, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah, I figured he could give us a firsthand account of the craziness that went on at UNC.
Yeah. Let's see. This is fun when all this technical stuff happens, but it's part of it. You learn just to let it sort of be. Processing my order. I had to buy some. Here we go.
Hello, this is Paul Krugman.
Hello, Paul. Welcome into the Josh Hendrickson Show. I'm Neal McCready. You know Josh. He's here with you as well. I'll let you guys take over here for a minute.
Yeah, so this is the man, the myth, the legend, Jonathan Williams from North Carolina. Future Fox News star.
Exactly.
John was the only faculty member who actually stuck up for the students who were kind of holding up the flag, preventing the flag from hitting the ground at North Carolina. So what can you tell us about this whole scene? What was it like?
Well, the first thing is there were two maintenance guys, and I think in this whole thing those guys were forgotten. So they actually were there first, and they got caught in this mob, doing their job, and so they were the first ones there holding it up, and and then various frat students just all bonded together, and then they came over and helped them, and so it was, and then I honestly, I didn't actually know what was going on at first. So I was on a call in my office, backside of our building, and you could hear noise and stuff, but it had been going on for a while, so I didn't even think anything of it. And so by the time I actually walked out of my building, the flag had already been ripped down once. Our chancellor had come back out, put the flag back up. And when I came back out, it was when it was being ripped down for the second time. So at that point, these kids were already standing there holding the flag, along with our, a couple of our UNC employees. And at that point, I didn't know I honestly, it's just sort of like you react, you don't know what to do till you got to do it. And so basically just walked out there, and I see bottles getting chucked at these kids. Some of them are bleeding. They got black eyes from getting hit with stuff. And this crowd just kept going in on them. And they started ripping down barriers and stuff, the steel barriers that were there. And so at one point, people were trying to rip the barriers apart. They're kind of linked to one another. They were trying to rip them apart and throw them at these kids. Like your only instinct is like you walk in on a scene like that, and you started trying to grab the barriers. I sat down on the barriers, like just literally just trying to keep them from using them, against these kids. And I mean, it was just pure chaos. And then at one point, finally got in there, tried to keep people back off the kids, but it was just chaos. And there was, the police, to their credit, they didn't know what was going on. Really, nobody knew what was going on. But these kids just stood there and took it. And it was absolutely amazing to watch. The kids were incredible. The kids, I keep saying kids, like, these are young men. But Josh will tell you, like, I complain about academia a lot. I complain about this, that. He's probably tired of hearing it. But like this, like just my optimism about kind of the next group of people coming through, UNC, like it completely flipped the script for me.
That's what I was going to ask you. What did you think when you saw a group of, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids are the ones that stand up and do it in a peaceful way, and they sort of they actually look sort of happy. I mean, even though they were getting all this abuse stuff, I mean, they're the ones that stood up. I mean, it's and you know this. We talked about this earlier. If you're young people, you're almost scared to stand up. You're scared to speak up. You're scared to say anything because you don't know what the repercussions are going to be. You're 2 or 3 years away from maybe having to find a job in the corporate world where there's going to be all these pressures on you to be a certain way, and being patriotic is not corporately cool anymore. And those guys stood up in the spur of the moment and did something that they believed in. That I'm curious, as an not only as an academician, but just as a man, what did you think?
I mean, the first thing is I just thought, for the first time in the last 5 years, I was like, these kids aren't afraid at all. I think their instincts just kicked in. These kids were raised right. And I think immediately, and you've seen some of the videos, like they were there was a huge crowd actually of students that was supporting them too. So, it's not, and most of the people that were encircling them were not students. The vast majority of them weren't. The people that were violent, I mean, clearly they weren't students. And so, but, in terms of what you were asking, it was just so encouraging because for the first time in, 5, 6 years, I saw this group of students that weren't afraid. They weren't afraid to speak up. And these 15 kids, it was just, I think, so empowering. I mean, I saw, actually at Ole Miss today, saw a video of, like basically the whole student body singing the national anthem over, protesters. No violence, nothing, just showing up in mass, not afraid, and, there and just drown them out. Right. And, these are a tiny fraction of the population that are causing these problems. Most of them, again, I said, are not students. And the students just, I think, really reached a breaking point. They were tired of seeing their campus get trashed. They were tired of seeing their classmates get attacked, and some of the things that were said, you can't imagine, that were being screamed at these kids. It was absolutely insane. But for the first time, I saw like kids just completely not afraid to do and say the right things, and it just and I really think that's going to change a lot going forward, in terms of others being less afraid. And the campus culture, I think, is just, it was just night and day. And you've probably seen. I know I sent Josh some pictures, but like our campus, there's nobody there. There's nobody protesting. They're gone. They have moved on to a place where the students aren't going to stand up to them, because the narrative that they were pushing is this is student protests. These are this, that student, it isn't. That's just a load of garbage.
You said they weren't.
And now the students are fighting back.
Yeah, you said they weren't students that were protesting. Who were they?
Oh, they were grown. These are 30, 40-year-old men. They're women that age. I can tell you right now, so I tend to be an early bird. I probably text Josh at 4 a.m. or whatever his time is or something. I'm walking through the office. They're like, these people were sleeping in the classrooms in our building. They were passed out in a bathroom on drugs. I talked to some of the police officers on our campus the next day. They were finding boxes of Narcan packed in these tents that were on campus that they cleared out. These were not students at all. They were just professional anarchists.
Well, we saw the same thing at Texas, right? Like there are a whole bunch of people arrested at Texas, and like 2/3 of them were not students.
Yeah. I think the ratio here was like 4-1 or something. And that was, and we actually had very few arrests. It was the morning they cleared the encampment. So the flag stuff happened in the afternoon, but the morning when they cleared the encampment, I think it was like 4-1 were outsiders to students. And there just weren't that many. Most people just said, okay, I'm out. They were gone. They were just there to be part of it or something. And as soon as the police said, hey, you have a choice, you can either clear out, you're violating the law, you're violating UNC policy, or you can be arrested. And many of them just walked away. But in terms, I think, of the ones, there's numbers out there, and I don't want to totally mess that up, but something like 3 or 4 to 1 were outsiders to students.
One of the things
and these weren't like even students. I mean, some of these people are 30, 40. There was probably a 50 or 60-year-old woman who got her stuff locked in our building because our staff were picking up sleeping bags in the morning and putting them in the office so that they weren't in the classrooms when students come in. And then when the encampment got broke up, they were all racing around at 6:30 in the morning, banging on doors. They wanted me to let them into offices, things like that, to get their stuff. And I looked at these people and I'm like, who are you? Why are you here? I'm not letting you in these doors. It was chaos.
One of the things I want you to talk about is, okay, so we've got the GoFundMe for these guys, and it's raised, what, are we up to $500,000 yet? Is it up to $500,000?
It's something like that.
Yeah. Okay, but I want you to talk about it because, like, the way that this is talked about on the internet is that what they're going to do is, like the big pitch on the GoFundMe is like, let's have a rager for these students. But I want you to tell what they're really going to do with the money.
That is a lot of tequila, man.
Yeah. So just to be clear, I don't know 100%. And I've talked to some of the students, and honestly, some of their parents have called me and thanked me and stuff. And that has been like the best feeling ever, is to hear from their parents. Because first of all, their parents are just proud as hell. And they also are so happy that, like, faculty members have stepped up and stood up for their kids. And so, like, but their parents, this is so much money. This is so much stuff coming at these kids, like, so fast. Honestly, I think some of them are a little overwhelmed. And so my understanding is of today is that, they're going to have a party. They're going to have some fun. Their fraternities, it's the end of the year, right?
Sure.
They're going to do that. And I think, maybe do a little extra or something. But the awesome thing is I remember a couple of them have come by my office and they were telling me about that when I looked it up, and they said they wanted to do something special, so that this is important. I know some of them have already started on their own. Like, one of the students, I think he's a baseball player. He was the one that was getting assaulted with the Israeli flag. He was holding it, walking around in some of those videos. I think he's started like a nonprofit to combat anti-Semitism. I don't think that has anything to do with the GoFundMe. But the GoFundMe, I think they're talking about, like, things like scholarships. They want to, take care of, like, service members' kids and families and stuff like that. Like, I mean, it's just the values where, like, this ain't about us. This is about, a bigger thing. And that's kind of what they're planning. But I think for now, and this was my advice to them, and I think their parents' advice as well, was like, guys, take a deep breath, study for finals. This money is not going anywhere, and you guys can figure out some great causes to do. But that's the type of stuff that they're talking about doing, which is just, it shows, the kind of the character that the kids have.
No, it's kind of an amazing thing. And I think that I will say it publicly, like, I'm very proud of you for what you did, because it's very hard to be in academia if you're not going along with the crowd. So you're either kind of going along with the crowd, or you're just kind of like blending in with the background, so that you're not calling attention to yourself if you disagree with, the what's going on. And so I think it was kind of cool that, like, you went out there and you helped these guys, because because I do think it's important. Like, I do think it's really important that it wasn't just them, that it was that you were out there with them and they had a faculty member, like, supporting them. Like, I think that's really, really important. And I also think that, like you mentioned it, like the facilities guys, like, it would have been really easy for those guys to just be like, we'll just come back in an hour, right? Like, it would have been really easy for them to just go do something else. And I think, like, they deserve a lot of credit for that too, because, they were, they were out there at a time when they didn't necessarily have to be out there and sticking up for these guys.
By the way, guys, the GoFundMe, this is according to Frielsmach in our chat. He says the GoFundMe is currently at $481,000, $480,522. So
and if people want to donate, I think they're going to turn it off tonight. Oh wow, I'm watching the news, and another one of them's on. this is the guy that's actually on the news now is the young man that was carrying the Israeli flag. So I think he's a baseball player, Brendan Rosenblum. So a couple of them on the news tonight. But yeah, no, the GoFundMe thing, they have awesome plans for it, and they're going to do awesome stuff. And I think they're going to relieve, the impact they've made. I told these guys, like, if there wasn't $1 to leave behind through this whole thing, they've already made an incredible impact, and that's going to be the legacy. Anything that they do with this money on top of it is just, a cherry on top.
Yeah, I think the message, and I told Josh this earlier in the show, I think the message that gets sent by so many people giving $10, $15, $20 to lead up to this amount of money, I think it's significant. I think to ignore it as a message being sent would be foolhardy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a lot of people going, yeah, you know what? That's so cool. Those guys want to have a party. Yeah, I'll buy them a case. That's
beer on me. Yep.
Yeah, that is exactly what that is. That is that whole, hey, I see you in a bar and I'm like, hey, I know that guy. He's a good dude. Hey, let me buy you a beer. This is people going, yep, I want to buy you guys a beer. That's what this is. There's something different about this. This is not, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
Nope.
I think there's something.
You're not wrong.
I think there's something to this. I think this is people like me seeing a fraternity, a bunch of boys that I don't know. And I'm like, I appreciate your gesture. Hell yeah, you guys at the end of your semester, you're about to take your finals. You're going to finish finals. You're going to blow off a little steam. Sure, I'll buy you a case of beer. Have at it. Have fun.
Yep. Yeah. And I can tell you, like, the coolest thing was, the next day, that afternoon, I just walked around shaking some of the maintenance guys' hands, the police officers. And now at this point, I've gotten to know them from just saying hi every morning and thank you. And, those guys are so proud of these kids. Like, they're just like, and they literally were like, my optimism, the stuff we were talking about being just hope, optimism. I'm down. I've been down on academia for a long time. Josh can tell you, I dunk on it regularly. There are so many aspects of it that just eat at me every day. And, then you see something like this and you're just like, okay, we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like, the kids aren't going to let the adults screw this up.
Yep.
And that to me was just like, I mean, just like, I'm walking around campus, just, feeling good. And it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's like
since I felt this good
Ole Miss today. It was awesome.
It
looked like a bunch of frat kids, and they get a bad reputation, but they didn't do anything wrong. They stood out there and sang the national anthem and chanted USA, and it just kind of makes you like it. I think it's noteworthy.
That's all it takes. I'll be honest. It is. But that's all it takes.
Yeah.
Is you have to just come, show up, and you stick together and you say, hey, this is our campus. This is this, we're here. You don't belong here. You're here to cause trouble. You're here to do these things. You're destroying stuff. We just we're here to learn. We're here to, get jobs. And I think a lot of them are just fed up with it. And it doesn't take much to stand up to these people either.
I've got 3 kids this age. I've got a 23-year-old, a 21-year-old, and a 17-year-old, and they all were deeply impacted by what happened with the COVID thing and all the overreaction to all the crap that we did to them. And I'm just going to tell you, I was around my oldest, who's 23 now, and a bunch of her sorority sisters. They've all graduated, but they were together, and it was really cool. We got to hang out with them on a Friday afternoon, sitting out at City Park in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and have a couple of beers and listening to them talk and stuff. And I'm going to tell you, that generation's more resilient than we think they are, and they're a little more pissed off about what got done to them than we think they are. And I think they're going to surprise people in the next 20 years. I do. I think they're going to shock a lot of people, because I think a lot of people give them a reputation that I don't think they necessarily all deserve. And they got screwed, and they know it, and they know who did it.
Oh yeah. No, a lot of decisions were made for them.
Yeah.
100%. And they were done badly.
Yes.
And they know it, like you said, they know it, and they're not going to take it sitting down.
No.
So,
yeah, agreed.
Which is cool as hell.
Well, and this explosion of the GoFundMe is really indicative of the fact that I think there are a lot of people out there they're just waiting for an adult to like walk into the room and actually like do something for a change, because like the adult like never come into the room.
And who would have thought it would have been the Pi Kappa Phi's at North Carolina, but here we are.
Yeah, and so I think, but that's it, right? Like these were the adults that entered the room, and people were like, finally,
Yeah.
right?
The Pi Kappa Phi's are the adults. There you go.
100%. And I don't know if you guys saw the two kids that did the kids. I keep saying that, young men that did the interviews tonight.
No.
I mean, these kids are just impressive. I mean, they're absolutely impressive individuals. The first one was in my office the other day, and just talking to him, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you interact with a lot of smart people, day to day, being in a school, UNC, but I mean, this kid was, he's just a very impressive individual. And, it just makes you like, it makes you feel good, to see him. Cause, that kid, his whole, either, I guess, the beginning of his college, end of his high school, was a complete disaster, with COVID. And, he walks in and you're just like, wow. So I'm totally with you guys on that. I think they are an impressive group, and I think they are going to, surprise a lot of people in terms of the things they accomplish and, how they kind of lead us going forward.
So we scooped Fox News. We got you before Fox News.
Yeah, exactly.
So
well, if Fox News now, I'd be afraid to go on there because, the kids set the bar pretty dang high. I'm just going to be a disappointment now. So I'll probably duck out of that one.
Yeah, you just slum it with the Josh Hendrickson Show. I get it. I understand.
Exactly.
Hey, thanks for the time. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for highlighting this kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun.
John's great. He's a really good guy.
I just think it's a great story, and I think when you put it into context, I know people tell me to let it go. I get that. I got it just today. Let it go. I don't really want to let it go. I'm apologize first. Say, hey, we did it. We knew we were doing it. We know we hurt kids. But these are the kids, those are the ones that got impacted. Mm-hmm. I mean, they did.
No, and they've been through a lot. Like he said, like we're still
their whole freshman year. Yeah. The current seniors, they spent their freshman year of college. Think about this for a minute. Go back. Think about your freshman year of college. They spent it locked up in a dorm room on Zoom.
Yeah,
on Zoom.
Yeah.
My daughter Campbell, her sophomore year at Arkansas was spent on Zoom.
No, I remember those days. I mean, they were awful. I mean, it was ridiculous. I remember I volunteered to teach in person, and I honestly thought like, I knew that there would be some people who wouldn't do it because they were older or maybe like they have health problems or something like that. But
hey, who do we have?
Bill, Talbot Buys.
Hey, Talbot, how are you, man?
Good, man. How about y'all?
Good. I'm going to call you tomorrow about the Vicksburg stuff, by the way. I ran out of time.
Okay.
Today was heavy podcast day, and I really didn't get a break from it.
Yeah. No, sounds like y'all kept me entertained on the way home from the golf tournament, so I appreciate that. I've enjoyed the listen. But I still have some chat about. Just give me a shout tomorrow.
Okay. Anything else?
All right.
Okay.
Thank y'all. See you. No, that's it. I'm enjoying listening. I'll let somebody else call.
Hey, who do we have?
Hey, this is Rico.
What's up, Rico?
First time caller, long time listener.
Yeah. You sound awfully familiar.
It's my favorite show on the MPW Digital Network. I'm just honored to call in.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
Hey, I have a serious question. As a Josh, I wanted to ask you this, especially. I've been nice and pissed off for a few weeks. As a educator and working in the college environment, teaching kids every day and being around faculty members, as teachers especially, you guys have them right before the real world hits them.
Mm-hmm.
And how much is being done when it comes to, students that want to get involved in protests and things like that? Has there been any, or do you know teachers that are giving any education to the young people about the digital footprint that's going on, basically a character development when you go to try to hire people. I am a business owner myself, and when I go to hire people, we do extensive background and social media checks. And when there is a digital footprint that's really been available for the last 15 years now, is how much education is going on in the college amongst the faculty to the students on that?
I think very little, and I think more needs to be done, because I think that they don't really get it, especially now, because I think one of the reasons it doesn't get done that much at universities is that when this technology was new, I think that students who were coming along when it was still new, like they already kind of realized that because they hadn't lived with it forever, right? And so they were kind of like, oh, well, obviously I don't want to do this, like say this stuff or do this stuff because, I'm going to be trying to get a job in a couple of years. But as time goes by, now we're dealing with people who have had access to this stuff, since they were little. And so, you've got probably, you can dig up their social media from, 7th grade, and you can find things. And so, like, I think a lot more needs to be done about this to sort of educate them on, hey, like, everything that you put out into the public, like, that's, everybody can observe that. Anybody can look that up. Anybody can find it.
Yeah, because, if you're in, a lot of people will say, oh, we don't hold that stuff against you, but it's part of your character. And so if you're trying to hire, if you're a business owner and you're going to hire somebody, and right, wrong, or indifferent, if you see someone publicly backing something that's of bad taste or bad character, they're not going to get a job. And it's already tough enough for them to get a job anyway, coming out of college. So that's one thing that, I think is lost in all this, is all the videos and everything that's out on social media today. There's a lot of people that are going to cost themselves jobs leaving college because of trying to be inclusive or cool or get clicks or engagement on social media today.
Yeah, I mean, there was a guy, we just talked to my friend John at UNC, and there was actually a guy in their PhD program who was caught on tape, in this protest. And I don't know what his final punishment was, but I know that he's facing a pretty significant punishment. And so this is a guy who, thought he was getting a PhD, and now, I don't even know if he's going to be welcome back at the university. So,
if you were involved in violence, you won't be.
No, and I think that, but people, people need to make this this clear, and there needs to be more of this, that like, hey, you're everything that you put out there, that's public information. And so if there's something that you don't want out there, or you think that, later on might be a problem for you, you need to chill out. But I mean, part of it though is like, these kids have all lived online. And I think that's what kind of creates this problem, is they lived online and they don't know any different, and they're not thinking about it. And I think we as parents also need to really be talking to our kids about this. Like, hey, you put that stuff out there, that's out there. People can see it. Like, they're gonna make judgments about you, whether you like it or not, based on what you're putting out there. And I mean, look, there's one side that's educating people, because I don't know if you saw, but I mean, at one side, maybe it's health related, but they're all wearing masks. So one side's pretty educated that you might not want to show your face.
Josh, we're still, listen, it's just 2 weeks to stop the curb.
Yeah.
The curve,
yeah.
curve, either, both. Just 2 weeks.
Josh, if Neal starts coughing or sneezing, there's a mask to your left, I think, back there in the corner that would be really good for you, to protect yourself.
Okay, I appreciate it.
It's a Joker mask. It's the green hair sticking out from under Leo the lion, because I identify as a lion some days. And so,
Rawr. All right, guys, appreciate you.
All right, see you. No, I don't know. The young people things, and you and I've had this conversation. I defend them a lot. People jump them. And I'm like, it's totally absurd that you lump an entire generation into one category. It's nuts. And there's so many of them who, I'm telling you, I run into them all the time. And I talked to a group of them the other night. It was Campbell's friends, and they know what happened. They do. They know what happened. It's interesting. It's one of the. I'm interested to see in this upcoming election. This isn't political. I'm interested to see in this upcoming election what the voter turnout looks like, what the young voter turnout looks like, and who the young people vote for.
Well, and I think the other thing though is like it's not just that there's a lot of young people who have these feelings. It's that they don't feel like they can express them, right? They saw what happened to people who expressed feelings otherwise. I mean, imagine you were somebody who, just wanted to go to school, and you see all the time on social media, or you see all the time on the news, people being demonized for saying, hey, school should be open, or like, those kinds of things. You're going to be upset, but you're probably not going to speak publicly about it. You're not going to speak up about it. You're going to talk about it with your friends maybe, but you're not going to talk about it with a lot of adults. You're certainly not going to talk about it with adults that you don't know very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I was talking to a friend yesterday. He was talking about his daughter. Real smart girl. Struggling some in some subjects. ACT scores not where they kind of thought it might be. And then you find out that ACT scores are kind of down historically right now. You're like, gosh, I wonder what it could be. And there's repercussions, just like people said there would be. When people I made enemies. I know I did. I mean, I pissed a lot of people off. And I was like, you guys you're failing the kids right now. And this is in a place that school opened. They went to school.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine what it's like in places where they didn't go to school, where they did a year and a half, basically, a year and a quarter of Zoom. And kids don't learn on Zoom.
No.
They learn nothing on Zoom. I don't care how good the teacher is, how hard the teacher tries. It just doesn't work like that. There's a reason that's not universally accepted. Young people need, and even beyond the school, beyond the academics, if you're 14 years old, if you're 15 years old, school is your social life. It's where you go to meet your friends and talk to your friends and interact with your friends and have lunch with your friends and goof around between classes with your friends. And that's where you go to play on the softball team or the soccer team or the football team or the basketball team or the tennis team or the whatever team, where it's important. You join clubs, right? And you have a club period where you go to the honor society or this French club or whatever the hell. I don't care, whatever. When you take all of that away and you just say, hey, sign into this screen, no, they don't learn anything. And you took a year and a half of learning away from them. And even in Oxford, the whole year was spent. Our sons were in the 8th grade. The whole year was spent on social distancing, on mask, pull your mask up, pull your mask up, pull your mask up. Carson came home that entire year. I'll say it, Oxford Middle School totally failed them. I don't care. Get mad. Totally failed them. Hey, Corey, hang on real quick. I'm going to finish my little rant here, then we'll get to you. They came home. He never had homework. The testing was a joke. He couldn't tell you what he learned. I'd say, what did y'all do in school today? I don't know. Some kid would get called to the principal's office. That meant they were going home for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
They'd been socially traced. His middle school 8th grade soccer season was essentially canceled. They just didn't play like 4 games. That's failure.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, in the carpool line after school, that's why people go get over it. Let it go. I don't want to let it go. No one's apologized yet. No one's accepted any responsibility yet. In the carpool line, you'd have the principal, a really smart person, screaming at kids outside, pull your mask up, pull your mask up. They're outside. They've had their mask on for 8 hours. Let it go.
Mm-hmm.
This is, December 2020, January 2021, February 2021. By now we kind of know, hey, this mass death of 8th graders never happened. Thank God, but it didn't happen. Maybe it's time to let this go. Maybe it's time to let it. No, can't do it. Got to be virtuous. Got to stay on this. Got to harp on it. Scream at the kids. Yeah, that was the crap you did. And you wonder why they pushed back? They got a little pissed off. They got disillusioned. Of course they did. And now their test scores 3 years later, they don't have the math skills. They lost a year and a half of math, of literature, of science. They lost all of that. It's total failure.
The adults prioritize themselves over the kids.
100%. We didn't. And it's in our instinct to put kids first, to protect the kids, and we didn't do it and I'm telling you, that bill's going to come home.
Mm-hmm.
Corey, how are you?
What's up?
We're just solving life's problems here, man.
I understand. Josh, did you know Dr. Chappell?
I did. Yeah, his office was 2 doors down from me. Yeah.
He was the best professor I ever had at Ole Miss, and I took electives under him, even though I didn't have to, just because I love the way he taught. And I can't remember if it was like Willie's Wieners and Hal's Hot Dogs, but he just had a great way of breaking that down. And I had this. I tried to reach out to him in 2020 and didn't know he passed away in 2019. Just had something I wanted to run by him, but yeah, I mean, I think that every student at Ole Miss ought to have to take economics at some point. I don't know if they do or they don't, but like I'll use things that I learned in his class across, not just business, but just across. Like you can use the law of diminishing returns in any part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to call in because I know there's a lot of people that listen to this show that are around my age that probably had interactions with Dr. Chappell and just kind of, pump him up a little bit. I know a lot of people probably don't know that he's passed away, but he was just a great man. And I really respected him and would take electives just to, not taking golf or basketball even. I was taking Econ 3.0 something because he had a great way of teaching the class. And I just wanted everybody out there to know that he was a very special guy. And a lot of people probably don't know that he's passed away.
No, he was a great guy, and he was very selfless. And he, I'll give you an example. So when he was about 2 or 3 years away from retirement, he knew that he was going to retire in a couple of years. And so, a lot of times you just kind of, when people make that decision like that early, a lot of them are just kind of like, well, I'll just kind of teach what I've always taught and just kind of, kind of wind down like any research that I had going on, and I'll just kind of coast into retirement. And he was the complete opposite. Like, he went to our department chair and was like, hey, look, I'm going to retire probably like 3 years or so, maybe a little longer, maybe a little less. I don't know. But he was basically like, look, because of that, I'm not really going to be doing much research anymore. And so like, what do you need me to do? Like, you need me to teach extra classes. You need me to like sit on committees. You need me to do like whatever you need me to do. Like, just give that to me and I'll take that on because part of his, part of your job there is, teaching research and service. And so, he knew that he was winding down and he wasn't really going to do any research. And he was like, hey, like, let's, let me take on the things that nobody else wants to do for a couple of years so that you guys can all focus on, what you guys need to do. And, before I retire. And I think like that is the kind of guy that he was. He was just an incredible human being.
Yeah. He was a great man. I just wanted to call in and give him a shout out. And I'll list this later. I've been on the golf course. I'm at his house, but he's just a great guy. Had a real way of explaining things, dumbed down, and then you figured out how they matter in the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And just a great guy. But
and I agree with you, by the way. All college students, Ole Miss or anywhere else, should take economics.
Yeah, it's not just about money.
Yeah,
I mean, you can literally apply that some of that stuff to every part of your life. Just it's a anyway. But I just want to give out a shout out to Dr. Chappell in the 35 to 45-year-old demographic that listens to this. They probably had him and probably didn't know that he passed away in 2019. But anyway, y'all have a great night, and I'll listen to this later.
All right, Corey. See you, buddy.
Bye.
No, that's actually the thing about when you like the great thing when you teach economics is you know that your students are really starting to get it when they come into your office and they just say something like, hey, the other day, like I was talking to my friend, or like, hey, I was at the grocery store, and there's just something that they noticed.
Yeah.
And they made the connection, and like with something that you had talked about in class, and you can see that they're starting to get it. They're starting to take it from the blackboard to real life, and it is true that, like, I mean, it's super applicable. I mean, it's basically, I mean, fundamentally, it's just about human behavior. It's just about costs and benefits. It's just about incentives. It's just about, those basic things. And so you can actually, understand human behavior a lot better. You just understand what people's incentives are. You wonder, if you know what if you know what the benefits and the costs of doing something are, you can predict whether people are going to do it or not, right? Like these are things that apply to any decision completely outside of economics.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be thinking about money or markets or something like that. It's human behavior.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. I mean, even all the stuff going on around the world is a study in human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the whole Ukraine thing, same thing. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but at the end of the day, it does boil down to human behavior in many ways. I mean, why is our government so concerned with Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean,
we kind of know, right? I mean,
yeah, but that's how you figure it out, right? You think, like, what's the incentive here? Like, what is driving them to do this?
They're leveraged.
Yeah, you think about the incentives. You think about, what do they see as the costs? What do they see as the benefits? You think about strategic behavior.
Self-protection.
Yeah, you can. All of these things are going to inform you as to why people behave the way that they do. And that's not to say that you can always perfectly predict what they're going to do, but you have a pretty good idea how people behave in certain situations.
Yeah, why did these things happen? And this isn't about Trump. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a Trump stan, but why did these things not happen during the Trump administration and then happen immediately after he leaves office? There's something to that. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that you think about how people behave. A lot of foreign policy is just strategic behavior. And so if you understand anything about strategic behavior, we have classes on game theory and stuff like that, which that's all it's about, is like, how do people behave strategically? And so, if you understand that stuff, you can understand a lot of different types of behavior, even if it's not obviously, economics.
All right. Speaking of, I've got a question from Army Reb 12. He says, on the previous episode, there was plenty of discussion over whether we, the U.S., should be sending such large quantities of military aid to Ukraine. To preface, I am critical whether it is a worthy investment myself, as I don't really see the conflict resolving in a way that would indicate a clear-cut victory for the U.S. and the West. In my opinion, Russia has already achieved their major goal, which was to create breakaway states within Ukraine to prevent its admission to NATO. This is straight from Russia's usual playbook, as they have done this in Moldova, Georgia, and now Ukraine. However, to play devil's advocate, I always enjoy devil's advocate personally. I think it's a great way to have conversations.
Yeah.
As to why we should send aid in this new age of great power competition, is it not up to the U.S. to defend the global system it has created? The U.S. not providing aid could be seen as a signal to China to attempt military action of their own against Taiwan, which is a much graver threat. In my opinion, the long-term goal of China and Russia's no limits partnership is to subvert and eventually replace U.S. leadership abroad and threaten current global institutions such as the IMF, World Bank, WTO, etc., by replacing them outright or assuming control over them. Bretton Woods institutions aren't perceived too fondly, but they have produced a very prosperous world in comparison with their alternatives, the most pertinent being Soviet communism. Thanks.
So
it's a really good devil's advocate question.
It's really, really good. But one of the things that I kind of want to dive into here is I actually think this is the real challenge with American foreign policy, is that Trump's foreign policy can be summarized in 2 words, which is like America first. And that's like a controversial opinion when it comes to foreign policy. But if you go back and you think about every president from George Washington to Teddy Roosevelt, like, America first would have been self-evidently true. Like that was the guide to foreign policy. And what I mean by this is like, what changed is when what really changed is when Woodrow Wilson took power, because foreign policy in the United States was always about is this in America's interest? Is there a reason that we should do this that will directly help us? And we went from, is this in America's interest, to, is this in the interest of humanity, or is this in the interest of global society? And to me, I think that was a huge mistake. I think it was a huge mistake because I think it leads you into a lot of places that you can't get out of. I think that because it leads you to the sorts of things that I criticize a lot, which is that you can't, you cannot, you can't fight against ideas, and you can't fight, for ideas. You can't fight against terrorism. You can't fight for democracy, because what does that mean? How do you know when you've achieved your objective?
Right.
And
you can only know if you're fighting
yes.
We're fighting Vietnam, we're fighting China,
right.
We're fighting Japan, we're fighting Germany, whatever the case may be.
And it's not to say that you can't fight terrorism, right? If you've identified terrorists, you can go and you can
you can fight terrorists,
yeah.
but you can't fight
right.
terrorism.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that the U.S. has kind of created this global system that they're in charge of. And my main concern is I don't know that that's sustainable over the long term. And I don't know that the United States can actually do this over the long term. And so but the challenge is that that's where we are. And so I think he brings up a really good point, because it's when I come on here and say, well, we shouldn't be doing this. Well, it's not as easy as just deciding we're just not going to do that anymore. We're just going to go back to, America first. We're just going to do, is it in the U.S. interest? There's got to be some kind of transition period there, right? You can't just go from one to the other. But I do think the United States is going to have to go from one to the other, because in building up, this global system, the problem is it's just the United States. Europe is incredibly weak. Europe doesn't contribute nearly enough that they should to these kinds of things. Ukraine is way more important to them than it is to the United States. But I don't think that anybody would say that they're paying their fair share here. They're they talk a good game and they say things about it, but the United States is kind of directing this thing. And I think that I mean, and he's right about Bretton Woods. Some of these institutions get a bad rap, but some of these institutions also kind of reinforce this global vision that the United States has. And to the extent that they reinforce those visions, that's actually not what they were set out to do in the first place. And so I think that we have to take that into account. But I think that, the issue is that we already, I guess the issue is that even if you accept that we're going to be this world policeman or whatever, you still can't intervene everywhere. You have to pick and choose what you do. You have to know what's worth spending your money on, what's not worth spending your money on.
How do we justify maintaining this world police thing when we have monumental debt? We have a border crisis. We have so much going on the home front. I realize that isolationism, it's been sort of proven that doesn't necessarily work. And I'm not advocating for that. But I am wondering, is it really our job to police Ukraine, to police the Israel-Gaza thing, to be everywhere and yet almost neglect domestic issues, especially at a time when we have a lot of domestic issues?
Well, I think that's the big thing. The reason that we've been able to do this is because of all of those Bretton Woods institutions, because of the way that we've structured the international monetary system. We've created all of these institutions and in our society that are essentially structured around ways to provide this service. The reason that the United States is able to do this is that the United States can run the United States can run budget deficits for very, very long periods of time, and they can also run balance of payments deficits for a very long period of time. That means there's a net outflow of dollars leaving the country. And they can do that for a long time because they've set up this system where everybody uses dollars. And so if you're borrowing and you're issuing all this new debt, but like all these countries need to hold your debt as a reserve asset, well, then you don't really have to worry about whether you're borrowing too much. Now, eventually you do. But like, when debt's sufficiently low, you don't really have to worry about that. And that allows you to then be like this sort of world policeman. And that allows you to go to when these countries don't like what the United States is doing, or they don't like holding all of the United States' debt. The United States goes to these countries and says, well, do you like being defended by the United States? Do you like our protection? Do you like that military base that we have there that protects you from your neighbor who hates you? And then they say, oh, you do? Okay, well, then I guess you're going to continue to buy our debt. And so these kinds of things, we've set up this kind of system. Now, I do think that we need to be concerned about that because the system that we've created, when you look at what China is doing, China is trying to replicate a lot of these things that the United States has created in the post-war era. And they're trying to recreate these things for themselves so that they can use these institutions to kind of create their own sphere of influence through these institutions and sort of copy those things. And so that's something that we need to be concerned about. But at the same time, the other thing is that I also think it's naive to think that we can just imagine that the world is just going to be a unipolar world where the United States is kind of like they're the big player and everybody else is kind of secondary players. Just like historically, like this doesn't tend to last forever. And so I think that's why it's important to actually think about these conflicts in a way that's not overextending our resources. Because if you overextend your resources, then when something bad happens and you have to, you need those resources, then all of a sudden you don't have them, or there's significant economic costs to mobilizing those resources. And so then in that case, there's a huge problem. And so, yes, you've got to look out for the U.S. interest. But I think at the same time, you have to, that has to be your primary focus. And helping the world, it has to be very particular circumstances where there's a clear objective, where you know what victory looks like and you can actually think that you can achieve it. Those are the times that you want to engage. And so if you're just kind of going around and trying to constantly like check the power of these other potential major powers, you could end up in a scenario where you've kind of spent yourself into a situation where you create the outcome you were afraid of the entire time.
Yeah, I can't even. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm not sure that I'm smart enough to really articulate them at this point. So I always come back to the basic thing that I say to people sometimes is that we're a really young country.
Mm-hmm.
Like you compare the U.S. to damn near any country in Europe. We're really young, and we have this assumption that because we're 200 years old, 250 years old, and we've survived a civil war, that we're good to go. And I think that's incredibly arrogant.
No, and I think
naive might be the better word.
No, and I think like if you study these institutions and you study like how this stuff works, I think it makes it really difficult not to see the areas where there's like fragility. And wherever you see fragility, like that should cause you concern, because where you see fragility, what I mean is that, very small, shocks could have very catastrophic consequences. And so what you want to do is you want to construct institutions that are anti-fragile, right? That when get put up against stress, get stronger, and they're not weaknesses. Now that's easier said than done. But I think that when you're overextending yourself and you're getting involved in conflicts without clear objectives, I think that that's not helping your cause, regardless of what you think the objectives of policy are. Because even if you think we should be sort of like the global hegemon and that we should kind of direct the global world order, you can only do that through strength. And so if you're doing things that signal weakness, or you're doing things that create potential weaknesses, then you're actually just playing into your enemy's hand.
The Indiana Pacers putting the finishing touches, the final nails in the coffin of the Milwaukee Bucks. Dame Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo will not win a championship this year. Pacers up by 22 with 2:06 to go. This one's over. The Pacers will, I guess, wait for the winner of the Sixers-Knicks series, game 6 of that series coming up a little later this evening. I always find it interesting when NBA teams, I'm jumping around. My mind is like a scattered, just complete. NBA teams where it was championship or bust, and it was that way for Milwaukee this year. When you go bust first round, how do you go from there? Where do you go from there? It's like with Phoenix, the Lakers, the autopsy stories that as a reporter, I know how this works. Whoever's covering the Milwaukee Bucks, he has an autopsy story ready with details that his readers don't know yet about there were signs, there was problems. Those are always fascinating stories to write. You spend a lot of time on them, and they're the most read thing that you ever write. And if you're covering the Bucks today, you're writing this autopsy of this team that went all in on Damian Lillard, and it didn't work. Giannis got hurt. Lillard couldn't stay healthy. You ran into a good Pacers team. Not great. Good. And they beat you in 6 games. And they're advancing and you're not. And everybody's going to get a year older. And you've traded all your assets. And there's a real possibility that the window is closed and that at some point in the next few months, Giannis Antetokounmpo walks into a room, or his agent, better yet, walks into a room and says, I want out. That's the NBA. That's sports, really. It's fascinating. Sports are all about competitive windows. And when the window closes, it's just sobering.
Well, and it's so hard, too, because there's a randomness to the playoffs. And so there's always this tendency to overreact. You know, like sometimes you just catch a team that's hot and you're unlucky.
Yep.
And
you're hurt and they're not.
Yeah, and you really have to kind of assess, like, okay, is this us? Like, do we have a flaw? Like, should we have seen this coming? Or was this just we just drew the short straw? Right?
Are we okay?
Yeah.
Should we run it back?
Yeah.
And those are the conversations that in those rooms that are really painful to have, and you have to have them, and you have to have them honestly. And in some rooms, it's like, no, let's run it back. We're gonna be okay. Like Purdue, they ran it back, went to the national title game. If you're the Phoenix Suns, you're like, we're screwed. What do we do? Oh my God! How did this happen? Right? And it's fascinating. Sports. All right. Last thing, we'll let Tyler have the last word. He says the people need to know Josh's stance on who killed JFK.
What am I allowed to say?
Anything you at this point on this network? Anything?
I'm gonna say not Lee Harvey Oswald.
All right. Let me interrupt.
All right.
Let's do it this way. I've had a couple beers, so I can have some fun. I'm the all-knowing God. If you're wrong, I'm striking you down. Okay? If you're right, you prosper. He said it wasn't Oswald. Did Oswald even fire a bullet that day in November of 1963 in Dallas? Did Lee Harvey Oswald pull the trigger on a rifle?
I think it's likely that he did, because his famous line was, "I'm a patsy." And I think that's a sign that he thought he was set up to take the fall and maybe didn't know it.
So you think he did pull the trigger?
I think there's a good possibility.
But you don't think he was the only gunman?
No, I think that
because there's a theory that Lee Harvey Oswald, to go on with your, that the sign that he was indeed a part of a conspiracy was when he went into the Texas hotel. He sat right next to people. If you're hiding, you don't sit from people. Next, if I'm coming into into a movie theater and I don't want to be seen, the last thing I'm going to do is go sit by Josh. He was looking for his mark. That's the theory. I'm not saying it's true. I don't know. But that's the theory, is that he was looking for his mark because his mark was going to get him out into a waiting airplane. Now, whether you believe this or not, there are people who have said that there was an airplane in Dallas waiting to take Lee Harvey Oswald to Mexico that afternoon.
He had to be involved in some way, just based on the evidence that we have. So he must have been involved in some way.
Yeah.
But if you look at this, and you look at the, I mean, here's the issue. It's very odd for someone to assassinate the president and then themselves be shot. Like, so this is, I think, what feeds the conspiracy, right? Is the Jack Ruby thing. Like, if Lee Harvey Oswald would have just like died of natural causes or something, like a week later, right? Like, or a year later, or 10 years later.
He was a young, healthy man.
I mean, people, like, I don't think it would cause as much. But here's the issue. The issue is that there's too much weird stuff surrounding this, right? So there is,
'cause Oswald had mob ties.
Well, so did the CIA.
Yeah, for sure.
So I mean, the thing is that
not Oswald. I meant Ruby had.
Yeah.
Ruby had mob ties.
Yeah. Well, and
Oswald had CIA ties. Oswald went to Russia, came back from Russia, and really with not much consternation. Anybody else who'd gone to Russia in the 1960s and come back, they would have been a target.
You have to know that. Okay, there's too many funny things, right? So, funny thing number one is that John F. Kennedy hated Allen Dulles.
Yeah.
He fired Allen Dulles.
After the Bay of Pigs.
Allen Dulles then is on the Warren Commission, right? So that's...
So is Gerald Ford, by the way.
That's a weird... Yes, that's a weird... That's a weird coincidence. Also, I don't know if people realize this or not, but, at this time in the 1960s, I mean, it has to be said. It has to be said. Okay. Let's just do it. Let's go full on.
Let's just
do it. Yeah, let's
rock
just do
on.
it.
Here we go.
All right. So there were guys in Southeast Asia, right, who are already engaged in conflicts there with the CIA. And they had to pay for their operations off the books. And so since they had to pay for their operations off the books, what they were doing is like some of the dead bodies that were being sent back to the United States, they were putting drugs in the body bags of these dead bodies, and then they were shipping them to the United States, and they were going to these morgues, and the morgues were owned and operated by the mob. And so the mob would get the body, they'd open up the body bag, they have the body, but then they also have the drugs, and then they're responsible for selling the drugs. And then the sale of the drugs is then going to be used to finance the covert operations that are going on. And this is the beginning of lots of this kind of behavior, right? So the idea that the mob could have been involved does not seem, that outrageous. The fact that Jack Ruby also has ties to the mob, and also the mob, saying that the mob could have done it, that's also equivalent to saying that the CIA could have done it, because
the Attorney General at the time was very vocal about shutting down the mob, prosecuting the mob, taking the mob down. The Attorney General happened to be named Kennedy. He was John F. Kennedy's younger brother.
He was also conveniently shot, 5 years later.
And there were mob people who said that the way to kill a snake is not to cut off its tail, it's to cut off its head.
And so, there was a lot of this stuff going on. I think that Kennedy was opposed to a lot of this stuff. Jack Ruby then had mob ties, which gives him a reason to be there to take out Oswald.
Silence Oswald.
I don't know if I've ever told you this story before, but okay. So I know a guy who had a student, and his student's dad was an attorney. I'm not going to say where he was an attorney. I'm trying not to dox anyone here. His dad is an attorney, and his dad. So when my friend met him, he was in his 90s or something, and he just asked him one day. He said, and this attorney, by the way, was or not an attorney. Why am I saying attorney? He was a doctor.
Okay.
And he was a doctor, and he basically, when the mob had somebody, that needed treatment and they couldn't take him to a hospital, they brought him to this doctor. And so my friend just asked him one day when he's like, 90 years old or something. He said, did the mob kill JFK? And without hesitation, he said, absolutely. Now, does he have evidence of that? I have no idea.
Right.
Right. But he did interact with these people all the time. So it's possible that he heard stories. It's also possible that he just made this up in his head. Right. But here's the issue with JFK. The issue with JFK is there's way too many moving parts that don't make sense. There's way too much of a cover up, right? Like we're never allowed to see documents. We're never allowed to know anything about what's going on.
Yeah. And Trump famously said that when he was asked, hey, you made a campaign promise that you would open the files. And he said, well, if you saw what I saw in the files, you wouldn't open them either, which is a cop-out, by the way. But it does make you wonder, what the hell did you see?
Well, and there's also the thing about, Jack Ruby was apparently, when he was in prison, he was visited by one of these doctors who was doing experiments on people with the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jack Ruby kind of went crazy after
Yeah.
this guy showed up and was giving him treatment. And so there's too many, there's too much weird stuff that's going on there. I think the fact that nobody will unseal the files, I don't think that the CIA, I don't think that there would ever be evidence that the CIA was involved. Like, I don't, like, that would be, like, even if they did it, there wouldn't, I don't think that there would be enough evidence that they were involved, because I don't think that they would do it. Right? Like, even if the CIA wanted to try something like that, they wouldn't do it themselves. They would have gone to the mob or somebody like that. But of course the mob had their own incentives, so that, potentially, they could have done it without any CIA involvement. However, if those people had ties to the CIA, then that might explain. Then even if the CIA had no role, then they might have wanted to cover it up. But I mean, even RFK Jr. has said that his dad, the very first thing that he did is when JFK was shot, is he called the director of the CIA and said, "Was this you?" Right? I mean,
oh yeah.
So I mean, it's not a crazy idea, right? I mean, this is something that that they've kind of that was obviously on their minds, right? And so I think that
did Lyndon Johnson know it was going to happen?
I don't know. Lyndon Johnson was a really bad guy. Nobody says this out loud, but he was a really bad guy. And I don't know why more people don't say this out loud.
Because there was a big meeting the night before in Dallas.
You ever know that Lyndon Johnson won an election? And like, I'm trying to think what it was. Basically, like, I don't remember if it was the last 100 votes, the last 1,000 votes, whatever. They were in alphabetical order. Did you know? People voted in alphabetical order.
Yeah,
it's
it
amazing.
happens all the time.
It's an amazing thing that happened. Those people in Texas, they're very diligent, right?
Hey, by the way, did you know that a second Boeing whistleblower died today?
Yeah, it's just a remarkable coincidence that.
I mean,
yeah. Well, he had pneumonia, they said. So
the odds.
Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, I keep waiting for people to go, what the hell?
No, I mean, look.
I mean, we're living in, maybe it's always been this way. Maybe that's the answer. I mean, if you go back and, to tie it all together, if you believe Kennedy was killed by the mob or the CIA contracted the mob or Watergate, whatever you believe, if you keep going, no matter where you go with that, once you start down that road, right, you can't rule anything out. It's not like it proves anything. It doesn't prove that there was election fraud, for example. It doesn't prove any of these things. But what it does is, like the whole moon landing thing. There was the guest on Rogan the other day, and all I said was, huh. And 4 years ago, I'd have been like, man, that dude's a freak. That dude's insane. He's an idiot. And when I caught myself as I'm driving down the road, and then frankly, we got to the game. So we got to Vicksburg. Carson's team was supposed to play at 2:00. We got there at like 12:30, and the boys got out of the truck, and I was like, well, I might as well get out and walk, get some steps. And the game that was in front of Carson was a girls' game that went to extra time. They played 2 extra 15-minute periods. They had a shootout, the whole deal. So by the time Carson and them got started, it was 3:05. Well, I had 2.5 hours. So I listened to the overwhelming majority of a Rogan deal with a guy who says that the moon landing was fake. I don't know. The point was, and I caught myself, and I was thinking about this, was 4 years ago, I would have been like, no, absolutely not. And what I caught myself going was, well, I mean, I guess maybe, I mean, kind of, I mean, sure, because if you could do this and this and this and this and this, and that's where the whole public thing gets lost. And in 1963, people didn't have the internet. In 1968, people didn't have the internet. They had Walter Cronkite. But now, in 2024, we have the internet. We have all the different channels. If you want to believe one thing, you can watch MSNBC. If you want to believe another thing, you can watch Fox News. There's all these places you can go, and you can be super informed, and you see all these things happen, and you're like, well, if you could do this, and if you could do this, then maybe you could do this. I don't think that's a completely absurd thing to say. Please feel free to tell me, no, Neal, you're an idiot. But that's where I got, it was like, well, do I think this guy's kind of crazy? I do. Some of his stories sounded wild and nuts. Some of the things like made sense. And at the end, Joe Rogan was like, well, I mean, it is kind of suspicious. And that was my thing too, was, well, it is kind of suspicious. I don't, if you lose my trust, it's hard for you to get it back.
Well, there's a weird thing that happens. Like if you talk to people about, like if I bring up this story about like the CIA smuggling drugs, right, in the 1960s, like this is widely reported. Like everybody, like if you just read books or go back and, read about these stories, like, I mean, that they were reported in newspapers and in books and things like that. Like these things are known, like people don't even deny it anymore. But the thing is like you talk to people about that, and the implication is always, yeah, it was crazy back then. And it's kind of like, well, maybe it was crazy back then. Maybe it's always been crazy. Who knows? Like, we don't know. But I think that's but that's the general attitude, right? The general attitude is like, people don't have a really hard time imagining that, these people did bad things in the 50s or in the 60s or even in the 70s. But like, as you get closer and closer to the present, then people get really uneasy about these things. And I think that's the big thing. I mean, we talked about this before. I think everybody that I know that watched like the octopus murders on Netflix, right? They were super disappointed, and they should have been disappointed, because like the first couple episodes are like really interesting, and like you're like, oh, where is this going to go? And then the last two episodes are just dumb. And the last two episodes are just kind of like, oh, these guys are crazy, and who knows whether they're telling us the truth or not. But here's the thing. Like, if you want to know more about this, like there's a book that's called The Prelude to Terror by Joseph Trento. And he talks about all of these guys. Like when they go through, I think it's like episode 2, they go through like the list of the 8 guys that are like at the core of this thing. Like that's what that entire book is about. That entire book is about, I don't think it's about all 8 guys, but it's about, at least 6 of those guys.
Yeah.
And it just like traces their, it just traces, what they were up to at the time. And some of this is based on just like news reports that are available. Some of it's based on interviews. Like one of the guys, Ed Wilson, went to prison. And then after that, he talked to Trento. Now, we don't know. I mean, he could be lying about this stuff, or he could be, or he could be embellishing, but he talked to him. He talked to, one of the guys. I don't know if it was his girlfriend or mistress or whoever it was, but like they talked to her. And, so like a lot of this stuff is like firsthand accounts of what these people were doing, plus reports, from newspapers about what they were doing, plus piecing this stuff together. And like, yeah, I mean, all of those guys were up to like some really crazy covert stuff, and the CIA was kind of out of control. And that's the point that the book, that book kind of made. And so, if you had already read that book and then you watched the octopus murders, I mean, I think you probably were even more disappointed than the people who hadn't read the book, because it just kind of goes nowhere. And so there are places that they could have taken it. But as I told you, I mean, like anytime you talk about this stuff, you got to be really careful, because you don't want to be cast as a conspiracy theorist. You don't want to be cast as one of these people who believes that like everybody's out to get them or something like that. But at the same time, there are
because I had people like going, because I just said, hey, I wrote in 10 thoughts that it made me think. It made me go, I don't know, maybe. And so people are like, oh, you're a nut. And it's like, well, okay, maybe I'm a nut. But what it told me about myself was, wow, you've really lost. Sorry, I have no idea why my phone's going off. You've really lost trust.
No, and I think that's right. I think that
you really don't trust the government anymore. You don't trust authority anymore.
Yeah.
You don't believe these people, these same people who in 2020 told you you must shut down. Hey, 2 weeks to stop the curve. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And you're like, okay, hey, let's do it all together, right? And then a little after that, it's like, no, it's gonna be longer than 2 weeks. And then you have the marches and you have the George Floyd thing happens, and all of a sudden you're like, well, no, wait a minute, hold up. I can't go to my package store and buy a bottle of wine, but 500,000 people can march on the streets of Dallas? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And people, oh, no, it makes perfect sense. And then the vaccine thing happens, and you're like, so the vaccine's going to take it all away. Oh, yeah. If you get the vaccine, you can't get COVID. You can't give COVID. And then, no, turns out you can. So why are we doing this? Are we proving this thing? And it's like, oh, no, it's all good. Keep going. And at some point, you just keep lying to the people, and the people don't believe you anymore. It's why, frankly, there are people who fervently believe that the 2020 election was stolen. I'm not saying it was. I can't prove that. In fact, if you made me bet, I'd bet that it wasn't. But I understand why people, in the hindsight of being lied to about all these other things, look at that and go, oh, yeah, absolutely, it was fixed. And if you can't, even if you're on the total other side of this, if you can't see why people are skeptical and cynical and feel burned, then you're not looking at this objectively. You're not being honest with yourself. I have sympathy for the people who believe, and empathy for the people who believe that the election was stolen. Because here's the thing. If you put a gun to my head, right, the same God who put you with the Oswald gun, was there any hanky-panky with the 2020 election? Before I go, no, I'm going to go, oh, God, please. Right? Do I believe 100%? Am I 100% certain that there wasn't ballot stuffing in Michigan and Atlanta and Wisconsin? No, I'm not. Because I remember that night at 3 o'clock in the morning going, wait, you're going to stop the count now? Why? Now, no court has proven it. No one has been able to prove that it happened at all. There's no proof that the election was fixed. But I understand why people feel the way they feel. It's like you look at the J6 thing. We've prosecuted all these people. We've locked them up, and yet we're not locking up the people who we're probably not going to prosecute the people who did the stuff at Columbia, at UCLA. It looks like selective prosecution.
Well, and it gets back to what we kind of, I think, talked about in an early show, is that the prevalence of conspiratorial thinking, regardless of whether there's any evidence of a conspiracy or not, regardless of whether people should believe in these things or not, like the conspiratorial thinking comes about for one reason and one reason only, and that's because people lose trust. They lose trust in the people that they once counted on to tell them what was going on, to tell them what really happened. And so once people start losing that trust, they start entertaining ideas that they never would have entertained before. Now, if something nefarious is going on, that's actually a great advantage to society, because then society can kind of open its eyes and it can see some of the things that people are doing that they shouldn't be doing. But if there's nothing like that going on, it can be very harmful, because now you've got these people who are essentially paranoid about stuff. But that's the fundamental point, is that once you lose that trust, it gives rise to this conspiratorial thinking. You shouldn't be surprised that people are entertaining things that they never would have entertained before, because they've been lied to about so many things
100%.
that they just, they immediately start to question everything. They immediately start to think, well, maybe this isn't true, or like maybe that's not true, or like maybe I don't know the full story about this. And, that's perfectly natural. That's, that's what's going to happen. It's a sign of the erosion of trust. You have a bunch of people who study conspiracy theories, and they always come up with these convoluted reasons about like why people do this and why people do that. Also, coincidentally, it's never people who are ideologically aligned with them. It's always their ideological opponents. They're the conspiracy theorists. But no, like what's going on is like it's just a decline in trust. Like people start to engage more ideas. They start to think about things they never would have thought about before, and they do that entirely because they've lost trust.
And we know what's coming in November, right, Josh?
Yeah.
If let's say Biden wins, Trump supporters are going to say, "See, you fixed it again." That's the only explanation for this old man, incompetent, horrible vice president, had a horrible 4 years, a disaster. He won again. You fixed it. And if Trump wins, the other side's going to say the same thing. They're going to have book my words. They're going to have their version of J6. It's coming. And the media will be like, "Oh, it's justified because this guy's evil. He's not going to walk. Remember this? He's not going to leave the White House voluntarily." And then he did. He walked right out. Got on the helicopter, went to the plane, got on the plane, he left. But they'll go, "Oh, no. He's an anarchist." That's coming. We know what's coming. And at some point, from a country standpoint, the fracture's too big. Because if you don't believe in the democratic system, the peaceful transfer of power, because we've seen it, right? I mean, in my lifetime, Jimmy Carter lost the election. Ronald Reagan took the oath of office and became president. George H.W. Bush lost to Bill Clinton. It was a painful loss. But he wrote him a letter and left voluntarily, and Bill Clinton became president. George W. Bush defeated Al Gore in a very contentious election. Yet, once the Supreme Court ruled, George W. Bush became president, and Bill Clinton welcomed him to the White House, and he drove with him to the Capitol, and George W. Bush became the president. And George W. Bush probably didn't envision Barack Obama as his successor, but he drove with him to the White House, and he left him a note, and he left on the plane, and Barack Obama became the president. And boy, you get past that stuff, and you get to a place where people don't trust the results of elections. You get to a place where once the elections aren't trusted, you're not really a democracy anymore.
What it's really going to take, honestly, is like a landslide. It's going to take like a landslide victory where you can't just say, "Oh, this was entirely like because a close election, either side is going to immediately not believe it. But if you get a landslide, now it's really difficult because like how many votes you got to switch right before you get that landslide. And so
it's what I hope for my country. Honestly, I hope for my country that one or the other, it's a blowout. I mean, it should be like people always ask me, "Who do you cheer for in football games?" I'm like, a blowout and a fast clock. and it's funny, really, because football doesn't matter. I mean, like Ole Miss plays LSU. Like, who are you for? I'm like, I don't know. I want someone to win by more than 2 touchdowns. I want it to get over with so I can get my writing done because I want to get home, right? I want to pour a glass of bourbon and light the fire and hang out with my wife and all that stuff. What do I want this time for my country, which is a much bigger deal? I don't care whoever it is, wins so big that it's over. No one can question it. There's a bit of a mandate. There's a message sent. And it's done quickly, like 10 o'clock that night, done. We don't need the 3 a.m. vote count thing where people legitimately go, "So wait a minute, in France and Argentina and all these other places, they can have the vote counted in 2 hours. And in America, we need 2 freaking months?" Which is a legitimate question. Like, why do we need so much time? I'm hoping that we get that night.
Yeah, and they've got to, well, and also, I mean, they do have to, like, if they care at all about restoring confidence, like, look, Florida manages to get all of their ballots counted, like, very quickly. And they have a lot of old people, which means that they have a lot of, like, absentee ballots. And so if Florida can do it, why can't every other state do it?
Yeah.
And I think that's
Hell,
the big...
even Mississippi gets it done.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's like, look, the longer it takes you, again, the more it leads to conspiratorial thinking because like, why is it suddenly taking so long? And also the reason too is that like it never used to do that. Like if it had always been that way, if it had always been like, oh, hey, we got to wait 2 days for Georgia or whatever, right? Like people would just be like, wow, that's Georgia, you know, they don't know how to count or something, right? And we would all have that joke.
But they could do it at night. All right, we'll let this be last call. Hey, welcome into the show. Who do we have?
Yeah. So, how do you think these protests affect the election?
So, I guess, well, I think in general, I mean, the difficult thing here is that like these protests actually do seem to like rally the left. Like they really want to like get behind this stuff. But I think actually though, what we're seeing is that these protests are sort of fracturing the left because the left actually isn't united on this issue of Israel and Palestine. And so I think that the protests seem to favor Donald Trump in the sense that people.
But you can't vote for Donald Trump. I mean, you can't vote for either of these guys. Would you?
I mean, if you so, all right. So let's play that out rationally. And I agree with you. There's a lot of people that. There's a lot.
I mean, I'm a hardcore Republican. You hate me. You hate me because I went on your board, but I think we come from the same way.
So here's the thing, right? If you go to the ballot, and I don't believe in a wasted vote. If you want to vote for the Green Party, that's your prerogative. It's your vote. If you believe in one,
why should I vote for two old men?
Well, I mean, but so here's the thing: if you believe that whoever you vote for, RFK Jr., the Green Party candidate, whoever, if you believe, which is accurate, that those people have no chance of winning, right? You're basically making a protest vote. And so if you do a protest vote, that's fine. If you're choosing, if you don't like either one of Biden or Trump, then it comes down to you're doing a lesser of two evils vote, which is obviously. Here's where I'm going to be suspicious. If I'm honest with both of you guys, if I'm suspicious on election night, is if we have some record turnout, I'm going to be like,
no,
hold up.
I'm not going. I'm not voting right now.
If we have some a record turnout, I'm going to be like, oh, wait a minute, hold up, stop. If every single poll, so if you think all polls are Democrat, all polls are Republican, all whatever you think, if every single poll to date, there's not one that can get either one of these cats. Hold on. There's not one that can get either one of these guys to 50% popularity. Most of them can't get them to 40% popularity.
Can any of them get them to 30?
Yeah, they can get them to 30. They can get them to 35. They can get them close to 40, but that's as far as it goes. If you're telling me that either one of those are the two guys that are running for president, and they get some 81 million to 75 million disparity, no. I don't buy that at all. I think that's the great suspicion about 2020 was that the vote total was so high. I mean,
I didn't vote in 2020
because in 2012, Barack Obama took the country by storm. He was a rock star. If you go back and look at it, he was at what was then called Mile High Stadium in Denver with the Broncos.
Yeah.
80,000 people in the stadium. I mean, the guy packed the place. And
what did he do?
He did pretty well. He got 68 million votes.
Yeah.
Barack Obama did. And then Joe Biden, who basically ran a campaign from his basement. And when he did campaign, there was nobody there, got 81 million votes. It was suspicious. I'm not saying he didn't get it.
Yeah.
Maybe there were that many people that voted against Donald Trump. But I think 4 years later, if the turnout is high, I'm suspicious.
Yeah, no. So I'm gonna ask you this. I have a lot of friends that were 25. Tell us why we should go vote, because I've talked to 12 people that said we're not voting until it's not dinosaurs walking.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to be one of these people who tell you to go vote, to be honest. Like not voting is actually a way of voicing your opinion,
of
right?
course.
Like if you if you genuinely can't pull the lever for somebody, I don't think that you should go. But I think that the issue is what happens is a lot of people at the end, like when it comes down to it, that week, that day, whatever. I think there are a lot of people who are just like, like I'm just going to pull the lever for this guy because I think that this guy is like less bad than this guy, or they're just really frustrated with somebody, or they really just can't. Because look, there's still going to be a ton of people who show up to vote for Joe Biden who are not voting for Joe Biden. They just hate Donald Trump, and so they're going to show up and vote for Joe Biden.
I can't tell you how many times in my life at 5 o'clock on election day, not even presidential elections, gubernatorial elections, whatever, I'm like, I guess I should go vote. I don't really want to go vote, but I'll go vote. I need to go vote. And so I go vote.
Yeah, but isn't that when you haven't seen both? We've seen both candidates, and they both, I mean, like I said, I'm hardcore. I voted for him in 2016, and 2020 I sat it out, and this, I mean, we've seen both of them, and they both respect. And so, I mean,
look, you've had 4 years of Trump. You've had 4 years of Biden. If that's your choice, I think you have to decide which of the 4 years you preferred.
Well, I mean, I guess it's just hold your nose and vote for one of them. I mean,
let me ask you a question though. So you're a hardcore Republican, right? Like, but what do you think of the Republican Party in general? Like, what do you think about, like, why do you think Donald Trump keeps winning?
I think he keeps winning because Republicans. Because I think he keeps winning because he made, with all due respect, he made the trailer park and all those people feel like they mattered when honestly care about them. And so he got all those in the middle guys. And that's how he won the Republican in 2016. And then I think this year, I think it was just Republicans that went against him were viewed as the evil person. And it was, let's do this back. And they did it. And honestly, if the Democrats were smart, they'd put up Andy Beshear from Kentucky. And in 2028, that's what worries me is if Biden wins in 2024, they'll put up Andy Beshear in 2028 because he's probably the best Democrat governor. And I think that's if they do that.
If they stick to their current, and this has been this way for at least 8 years now, if they stick to their current method of selecting their candidate in 2028, the candidate will have to be Kamala Harris because it's her turn. Everything's identity politics with them.
Yeah, and that'd be good for the Republican Party, but I tell you what, if he's not ready, he wasn't ready this in 2024, but the second Andy Beshear gets on that ballot he's good. He's done Kentucky well. And if I was a Republican and she wasn't ready, but what's her name? Nikki is the only person I think in 2028 that could go up against him because I think then you get the females that are in that middle ground, and then you get those woke for females. Let's do that. I don't know, but this election's going to suck. It's just going to be a hold your nose and 4 more years of this. And I guess every night, as I've told my fiance every night, I don't know what's going to happen when we wake up in the morning. Who knows with both of these people.
Well, I think another problem the Republicans have, though, is Republicans have bought into this narrative that they have to play this sort of demographic game. Like they should just be focused on choosing the person who's the best person to lead the party and win an election and those kinds of things. And they've kind of fallen into this trap where, they make fun of the Democrats for announcing that they're going to pick a woman or something, or announcing that, they're going to pick this specific demographic to be a candidate. But then the Republicans will essentially do a lot of the same stuff. I mean, the messaging that out of Nikki Haley's campaign was
what's the exact same? It was a liberal campaign that she ran.
Yeah, it was all I'm a woman and it was all identity stuff, and it was like a Democratic playbook. And it was why do you think that Republicans would vote for this? They make fun of it when Democrats do it, and now you're just adopting the same framing that the Democrats use. So it's an obvious losing strategy. I don't get it.
So 2024, let's say, this is what I want to hear. Donald Trump wins in a couple months. No way you put him up. I don't think either one of these you put up in 28. So
neither one.
Who do you think will be the campaign?
I mean, if Trump wins, he can't run the third time. And if Biden loses, he'll be 86 when he ran for a second term. That's not happening.
Oh yeah. Oh wait, yeah. So who do you think will run in 28?
Who knows? I don't know what the country looks like in 28.
I mean, if we're selecting on competence, we would want Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, 100%.
But the thing is that but also his flaw is like he's like a really good governor, but I'm not convinced he's a very good like politician or campaigner.
DeSantis versus Kentucky boy would be a good election.
Yeah.
Bashir.
I mean, again, the Democrats right now are very focused on identity politics. That's why they've made a lot of the decisions they've made. So, I mean, it's almost impossible to look 5 years down the road, 4 years down the road.
Do you think we're going to war?
No, because I think the majority of America would absolutely push back at that.
Yeah, it's too. I mean, not given the present circumstances. I think it would take like a significant, unexpected event to do that. I mean,
it would take China getting involved, right, into Hamas and all that.
Yeah, or it would take like so. I don't know. The thing with Iran was weird. Like so when Iran attacked Israel, kind of like, oh, this is it. But the thing is that, and the other thing is like people were really upset about Israel because Israel like attacked like a Iranian consulate or something in Syria.
Yeah.
But the thing was they attacked that consulate because it was housing like Hamas leaders, and there were and so but like attacking like a consulate is considered, attacking, like that's considered an attack on your land, right? And so they had to do something. And I think people really kind of got out ahead of they got what's the phrase? They got over their skis,
over
right?
their skis.
Yeah, and
because the Iranians basically gave a 72-hour warning that, hey, here's what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Here's what's coming, which was kind of their way of going, hey, we have to do this from a domestic standpoint, but we really don't want to cause problems. Let this just sort of be our return shot, then you guys leave it alone.
Well, and I think China would like to stay out of things as long as possible. So, like, I don't think that they want. I don't think they want to be involved in this at all. Like, I think that they would, like, ideally, like I think that they would like to see themselves as like the United States during World War I, where the United States just stayed out of any conflict as long as they possibly could.
Yeah.
Because it created a lot of economic benefits for the United States, and it gave the United States a lot of strength. And I think like there's evidence that the Chinese have really studied how the United States became a global superpower, and I think that they're replicating a lot of those things. And so I think that they've learned a lot of those lessons. But I think it would take something kind of I mean, you never know. Like, I mean, the thing about war is things are unexpected. So like, like nothing ever goes to plan. There's always something that happens that you don't expect. And so that like the stuff about Iran a couple of weeks ago was kind of, much ado about nothing. But, that's not to say that, if Iran had just made a mistake there, if they had not like sort of kind of given them a warning, or they had not like kind of, tried to diffuse the situation, like that could have that could have become much worse. And then you never really know what happens. And we do have some politicians who seem like intent on like going to war with Iran for some reason. And so, who knows?
Well, I mean, now that Lindsey Graham's sons are old enough that wait, he doesn't have kids, does he?
No, he
oh,
doesn't.
Son of a bitch! How about that? He doesn't have to think about
Lindsey
it.
Graham's a bitch. Fuck Lindsey Graham. Fuck that motherfucker.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks for the call.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I know you hate me, but this was a good call.
Thank you. All right, we're going to wrap it there. Josh did not probably plan on a 3-hour plus show here this evening on Hand Raise Guys. Again, we're brought to you by Comer Heating and Air, Southern Air Conditioning and Heating. Get in touch with those guys, 662-801-1777, 662-429-4429. We'll have a big giveaway here in the next few weeks, giving away a complete heating and cooling system, which is worth like $10,000 plus. So you want to be a part of that. So we'll get more details on that as we learn them. Josh, thanks so much for the time. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
That was a lot of fun.
Until then, we'll be back on Monday. Complete coverage this weekend. Ole Miss at Auburn, baseball. We got basketball recruiting if it comes up, football recruiting if it comes up, and another full week of podcast at MPW Digital starting on Monday morning with Blue Sky Live. Until then, take care.